Hey everyone, welcome back to Dialog Choices podcast. It's been a few weeks for the usual reasons. This week, Colonel has COVID and Andrew is in Europe. So instead, I'm joined by two furries. We've got Toaster Ringtail, which you can find at twitch.tv/toastedringtail. He's been doing VTuber streams of like Sherlock and The Last of Us and stuff. And then we've got Cloud Cuckoo Country, which I got the words in the correct order this time, unlike the Armello disaster. So we've reached a 100% gay furry saturation on this podcast. You can find Cloud Cuckoo Country by going to Cloud Cuckoo Country on YouTube, and he does a lot of like book video essays / reviews / more recently like preview like book club videos, I guess.
Yeah,
is the current thing.
People still don't fully understand what that is. I thought I explained it okay, in that I do like one recommendation video, and then a couple of months later I do a book club that features the comments from people who actually went away and read the book. I thought, I thought I explained it, but I think people just need to see it in order to get it. Because I
never underestimate YouTube's ability to misinterpret. I'm always impressed in new ways. Like I put out a post saying like, "Hey, I'm doing these little like puppeteered shorts based on Ad Astra and Echo scenes. Like, what were your favorite moments so far?" And maybe I'll make one. And immediately people are referencing like future events of Echo that have never happened in the series. I'm like, that's obviously not what I meant. What? What? How can that be your favorite moment of the playthrough when we haven't gotten there? People are impressive. They're beautiful, and they're a disaster.
Incredible.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the shorts have been doing pretty well, though, right? You were posting about it on Discord last week.
They're doing all right. It's a variety. They're doing better than my other content, which is also not doing well. It's the real thing that's happening. But anyway, Cuckoo, I don't know if you know the nightmare that began because you joined us for Let's Plays, which is that we started playing Armello to hang out with you that time, and we've continued to play Armello, but the horrifying disaster that has occurred is that as you'll remember, I won the match with you by somebody trying to kill the king and then dying.
I think that was me.
And then I won the prestige victory on accident, not knowing that it even worked that way.
Oh yeah.
I have now won 4 consecutive games with prestige.
Yeah, that happens.
I remember
still don't
fully know what I'm doing, and I'm exclusively winning because someone else fails to kill the king every match.
Yeah, there was that used to be like every game of Armello in the beta that I remember, because there was like a version, because I was in the Armello beta, and there was a version of the game that didn't have a lot of the character progression and didn't have ways for you to like, you know, make it more likely that you roll like all of the good treasure cards that let you like make your character overpowered. But the king was still an overpowered character to fight, and so most of the game was just you wander around hoping that you draw good cards, and then, you know, go and fight the king, and then you just stood no chance or barely any chance, and every single game ended in prestige victory. And people kept like just the forums are basically just nothing but people suggesting to the devs, how can we make it so that every victory isn't a prestige victory? But it was a strange time.
For context, Armello is a furry not a board game adaptation, but a made for video games board game style like strategy game.
I don't think it's explicitly furry. Like it's furry in the same way that you can call like Redwall furry. Like if you actually asked Brian Jacques or Jacques, I can never remember how his name's supposed to be pronounced, whether the S is silent or not. If you asked him, he would probably tell you. Well, he'd probably say back to you, first of all, what the hell is a furry? And then if you asked him in earnest, he'd probably say, Yeah, I'm probably not that. I just wrote a bunch of kids' books featuring like furry animals that wear clothes, walk on two legs, talk, and swing swords. But you know, it has the kind of aesthetic that a lot of furries vibe with, and so we kind of just, you know,
it's the difference between anthro that is in the fandom and anthro that's out of the fandom. The way I was going to elaborate though was that it is just a neutral, like, people make animal people in video games and in fiction and so on. But all of the credited artists that I recognize are furry artists, and one of them I've commissioned twice. So that's what. So it's kind of in the fandom. Like, it's got. Speaking of last names we struggle with, it's got or first names, I guess. It's got Jeremy or Jerome Jacinto, who is the artist of Tooth and Tail and Ghost of a Tale. Also does a lot of the cards in Armello, and I've commissioned them multiple times, and they're, I would say, decidedly furry.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's hard to say exactly, but it's a cool game. I'm mixed on it on some level lately. I'm still learning it, but I'm winning every match even though I'm learning it. And there's like a lot of mechanics that are fun, but I don't know if I necessarily love just how free you are to spam your hand of nightmare cards at other players to essentially punish the idea of being the first one to try to go after the king ever. It's just like, it quickly becomes this, like, you're punished for trying to do the thing in a way that isn't entirely, like, how do I put this? Like, I play a lot of Twilight Imperium. I don't know if you're aware of that game, but it's like space, like, it's like the video game Civilization kind of, but it's like a 6 to 8 player competitive tabletop game that takes 8 hours to play, basically, where you have like a randomly generated tile based solar system, and everyone's playing a different galactic civilization that has different unit strengths and costs and like racial abilities and so on, and you all like try to play this big sort of like this asymmetrical free-for-all game. And it has a similar thing to Armello, where because it's free-for-all, it's not inherently a skill-based fair game, because the only way to have that really is to have a one-on-one game or a team versus team game in any game. The moment a game is free-for-all, you're more open to the whims of like emergent storytelling than you are to game balance. Like, everyone's just collectively making dramatic choices, partly out of spite and partly out of strategic choices, but it's so chaotic that so many people are acting in their own interests against each other that the result is chaos, and what you get out of it is a story more often than anything. But like, that game does have a central planet that has a massive amount of influence, to the point where it can sway every vote throughout the game, and is just a very powerful place, and also can literally just become a source of victory points every turn. So there's like a very powerful central planet, but the moment you go there, you're comically like a target to everyone. And also the victory point tracker every turn is visible, so you can see who's on the verge of potentially winning, and all decide to just obliterate that person if you really want to, as a collective table. But
the good old-fashioned free-for-all game strategy of everyone hit the leader.
It's like the prisoner's dilemma a little bit. Like, there's like this element of like, either everyone collectively decides to crush this thing that is the person that's seemingly winning, which in some ways often just king makes somebody else, or everyone is like loudly announcing how bad this person's a problem and clearly needs to be dealt with, while not making any personal risks to do so, because they don't want to lose the resources. And then like, why isn't anyone dealing with this thing that I'm not dealing with?
Well, it's like holding on to your blue shell in Mario Kart, being like, well, maybe if someone else gets the first person out, I can like use my blue shell to knock the second person out of place. But like, I find the tabletop balance.
I find the Twilight Imperium approach slightly more compelling, just because when you see the person who is the problem and you decide you're going to deal with them in some way, you have to like invest resources in a way that is a risk to yourself. Like, you engage in like Risk style, like the board game Risk style, like battles where that can go either way, no matter how stacked things are in one way or the other, because they're dice based. And like in Armello, you can just like, lol, I have a card that says you lose. I played it from 10 tiles away just because I didn't want you to do that. And you're like, oh, Like you could, like people could play a card on you at almost no cost to themselves that just makes you spend 3 turns walking back to where you were. And it's like it's a little too like Mario Party sometimes, but I think that's why I keep winning also, because it's not entirely based on who's making the smartest choices. But there's a lot of compelling stuff. It's a cool art style and it's a fun little loop. It's fun to hang out and just play.
Yeah. I think it is one of those games where I think if it didn't have the furry adjacent aesthetic, I probably wouldn't play it at all. But like, it pushes it over the line for me for never play it to, I'll break this out sometimes. It's fun.
I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I've like stayed away from it, honestly. I'm notoriously not a huge fan of like digital board games in general. But I do like Armello's art style. I think it looks very nice. But then every single time I watch the streams, or I've had a few opportunities to play it myself, and I'm just like, man, this game is just chaos sort of experience. It's not exactly for me, but I find it very very good looking at the very least. And I think the furry adjacent aspect of it is what made it catch my attention to begin with, even if it didn't really stick with me. I think I've played a considerable amount of Root, which is also pretty furry adjacent. And that game I think has a lot of similar issues, but I do like it, every once in a while.
Root is less
I've
like
only played one. I've
Yeah.
only played one proper game of Root, and it was one where I got out to an early lead, and then everyone just failed to coordinate to hit the leader, and then everyone, and then I just sort of said to everyone in like the last few turns, like, the reason I'm winning is because you all know I'm winning, but none of you are like punishing me for it. If you all pooled together your resources and punished me, then I wouldn't win. And so in the last few turns, they actually all just focused exclusively on me, and then I didn't win. And one of my friends actually managed to overtake me, and I forget what the specific victory conditions are in that game because I only played it once ages ago. But yeah, I came in close second because of that. So yeah, the free for all party games are not the best for strategy, but people want to play. People want to play them. People want to play free for all party games. So
Root's a beautiful game in that it's a horrible idea. Like they like for the same reason that Overwatch is a horrible idea, where you're like, what if almost every character had their own rule set essentially and was playing kind of a different game. Like how Overwatch is a game where Doomfist exists, or like Wrecking Ball exists. Like you're a physics-based rolling character that is playing a game against someone who just has a gun. Like like people are just playing different things, and like Root is a 4 corners map that only has 3 kingdoms because the 4th player is Geralt wandering around doing quests on the map. And all the 4 kingdoms have different rules completely. Most notably, like the fucking birds just have like this Skeksis like hierarchy where they have to fulfill incredibly specific promises every turn to their own rule set that have nothing to do with other players. And if they fail their self-declared rule every turn, then they have a collapse of government and have to reform their government and get new rules, and it resets like their abilities essentially, and like every team has some kind of weird fucked up thing going on like that. It's a baffling game.
Sometimes games are just sometimes games are just designed like that. Like I follow a lot of like esports, and sometimes in order to make like a specific character or faction interesting, they'll just invent a whole separate mechanic from like the base core mechanics, and like they'll give a character in a fighting game their own meter and their own unique special resources that they have to keep track of. Or like my favorite in recent Age of Empires 4, they've tried to which I play a lot, it's my favorite game. They introduced like factions with like their own like special menu that they can like select options on that no other faction in the game has. It's just like, at some point you get away from a I suppose what people would consider like the core mechanics of the game. And just into like special, like unique, I'm playing, single player with myself territory, which can get a bit dangerous sometimes, I think.
I'm so out of date
it's
with
interesting.
It's
interesting that you bring up like fighting games too, because that sort of concept of like introducing individual mechanics for characters, more so than just like, here's a unique spin on how this character like plays the neutral or whatever, like you have in something like Street Fighter. The thing that sort of defines a lot of the modern anime fighters, like Guilty Gear, which is the game that I play primarily, and like even other stuff like Blaze Blue or like the Persona fighting game, or even DBFZ to some extent, is this idea that like each character has their own unique mechanics and unique approach to the game. So just speaking from my experience, like Guilty Gear is really uniquely asynchronous in that regard, because what like a Chip or a Milia player has to do to be at advantage is very different than like what a Happy Chaos player has to do. Happy Chaos has a gun and he has ammo he needs to manage, and the spots on the screen that he plays well on are very different than like a Chip or a Soul or a Kai, who are like kind of more rush down, close range, mid-range players in the game. And in some sense, every game has like a different, or every genre, I should say, has a different degree of asynchronicity that you can like allow for, right? Like Overwatch has characters that have different mechanics that play really differently from each other, but they still sort of are playing the same game in some sense of like, okay, we all have a goal. We need to move here. We need to eliminate the other team. We need to capture a point or whatever. The same thing is definitely true in fighting games, and especially in Guilty Gear. At the end of the day, you're just trying to get your opponent's health down. But like the amount of flexibility that you get in these experiences that sort of target this asynchronicity can really have a drastic effect on how individual players even approach the game. So it's funny. I've been playing a lot of Street Fighter V this past week because I'm trying to get prepared for Street Fighter 6
is coming out later this year.
Exactly. And it's funny, I'm like a top 500 Guilty Gear player when I'm grinding, but I'm like hard stuck silver in Street Fighter V, because Street Fighter is such a fundamentals based game. Even with the individual mechanics on each character, you still have to be good at the same things across the cast in order to succeed and get anywhere. Whereas in Guilty Gear, like I'm really great at playing my character, but if I like switch to a different character, like I'm basically playing a completely different game and I would be garbage at them. Street Fighter V doesn't matter who I play. I'm like hard stuck silver because of my fundamentals. So it's kind of interesting to see how that like asynchronicity actually affects different genres.
You heard it here first, folks. Street Fighter players are just better than Guilty Gear players, apparently.
I mean, I don't want to play into the trope.
There's probably some actual drama about that online somewhere.
Discourse.
You go deep enough on Twitter.
There definitely is. Street Fighter players absolutely believe they have like the best fundamentals ever and are better at footsies and neutral than any other games. I don't necessarily agree or disagree with that. I think it's just the amount of things that these games focus on and like what you have to be super good at in order to reach a modicum of success differs based on what it's focusing on, right? Like I think a top level Guilty Gear player who's like actually good at the game could probably transfer over to Street Fighter, because fundamentals are fundamentals in all fighting games, and no matter what, you have to get good at certain things in order to do well. But like, yeah, Street Fighter players are better at not jumping than Guilty Gear players, right? And that's just a side effect of, the system mechanics and kind of what they focus on. So it is what it is. I'm definitely bad at Street Fighter comparative to a lot of anime fighting games. Like I struggle very deeply playing, very patient neutral. So it is what it is. But don't cancel me, other Guilty Gear players.
Zangief.
I'm excited about that. I think Street Fighter 6 looks fantastic. I'm very, very excited to play that game.
I like fighting games where you strafe.
Mm-hmm.
I like a 3D level. I'm immediately so much less interested in any fighting game that exists in 2D.
I have started learning the fighting game genre with Guilty Gear Strive in my Discord server with some friends. And part of the reason is that like I try to get my friends to learn RTS because I'm an RTS guy. But a lot of my friends are just like, what is this? Can I swear on your podcast?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. A lot of my friends are like, what is this?
Later, so.
Oh, okay. What is this fucking genre? I just don't get it. You know, you move units and wait for everything to happen. And I'm like, no, it's really good. And so to try and meet them on mutual ground, I've also committed to learning genres that they like. And one of them is fighting games. And so I've been trying to practice quarter circles and shoryuken motions and shit. And I'm oscillating between this is really, really fun and this is really, really frustrating, depending on how reliably my moves come out.
Yeah.
So, I honestly like to play fighting games that have simple inputs, basically. That just, like, that have more emphasis on, like, you can strafe, you can knock people against walls and off ledges and things, but, like, there just aren't like hard combos in Dead or Alive.
I mean, there's the only thing that I know about the discourse is that, like, a lot of people bring up every now and again, fighting games shouldn't have hard inputs, quarter circles and shoryuken motions are too hard, and then that starts a discourse of like, oh, you people just need to get good and so on.
Yeah.
But now there's actually has been some evolution to the discourse, because apparently there's this thing called a hitbox controller, which just gets rid of the stick entirely and makes it more like an RTS layout, ironically, where you like have hotkeys for macro inputs or some shit. I don't know too much about it myself, but it does look a little bit more like they're like people like mashing hotkeys on a keyboard. So I have been thinking about just like button layouting my keyboard and seeing if that makes it easier and makes it more consistent, and I don't have to like wrestle with the analog stick on my controller.
Hey, Toaster, you have a hitbox, right?
I do. I have a hitbox sitting right next to me. They are not. It's not so much hotkeys as it is using like arrow keys. So the thing with fighting games in most cases is that they only read cardinal inputs outside of really specific instances when it's trying to figure out how to parse input between like a quarter circle forward and a DP. For people who are listening and they hear that and understand that, good for you. I'm not going to explain what that means for people who don't. But basically, a hitbox controller just makes it so your inputs are really clean, and it is just faster than using a stick because you can just tap with your fingers rather than, doing full motions with your wrist or your arm like you would with a levered controller. But yeah, it's been a preference lately. It's like a thing that I guess first came out, I want to say back in like 2013 was when you started seeing them hit the market and start getting popularized. But nowadays, leverless controllers are very, very popular, and are taking a big sort of amount of mind share in the fighting game community discourse, just because people are like, oh, it's cheating because you can do inputs really quickly and the game's not designed around it, versus like old school kind of purists who prefer levered controllers, and then even further from that, like Zoomer fighting game players who are playing on like game pads and stuff. So hitboxes are interesting. I like them. That's how I prefer to play. Though actually my favorite controller is called a cross-up, which is like a levered stick that has hitbox extra buttons on it. So it's like you have an analog stick and a D-pad that you can have access to. So it makes it more like a gamepad. And those are very controversial, but I do really, really like my cross-up. But fighting game input discourse is like a whole topic that is insane and complicated. But
I've always found like controller discourse very, very odd, just because like what I'm used to in RTS is just fully customizable hotkeys. Like you can literally just wire up, like it's usually just expected that an RTS game will have like customization options to just allow you to play it however you want, because the challenge. There's people think of it as like a mechanical execution kind of genre because they've seen StarCraft pros with like 400 APM, but it's actually more of a like attention splitting genre. So like how you mash the buttons is like not as important as like are you just doing multiple things at the same time. So you could like wire up the most cheaty like I'm letting the gameplay itself set up you want, but if you can't split your attention and make multiple decisions on multiple fronts at the same time, you're not really playing the genre, and there's no controller that's going to fix that for you.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like this is going to make people really mad, but at a certain point, you just need to learn how to actually play the game. Like, not to say people need to get good, but like, if you can't do a dragon punch, like at some point, you just got to learn how to do a dragon punch. There's nothing you can do to make yourself
my Shoryuken motions are so inconsistent. Like, I got the quarter circle down, and I can do quarter circles consistently, you know, provided I don't put the game down for 2 weeks and then come back and I'm like, oh god, my quarter circles are inconsistent again. But like the Shoryuken motion is hard. Like,
for sure.
It feels hard to me to do with an analog stick. I'll say that. And I hate it, and that's why I almost never use like the Dragon Punch moves. And I'm always like, what other moves can I do instead of Dragon Punch? And sometimes it does feel a little bit amp, especially like if I go into combo recipes and it's like, end this combo with a Dragon Punch. I'm like, well, I guess I'm ending it with something else then.
For sure. I mean, I think it's one of those things too that comes from a not archaic in the like obsolete sense, but a truly old-fashioned design of when arcades were in cabinets, and every single time you wanted to play a fighting game, you had to use a stick. And like doing a DP on a stick is not as hard as it is to do on a controller, or even, on an analog stick, regardless of if you're using a D-pad or an analog stick on a controller, because this is getting way in the weeds, but arcade sticks usually have something called a square gate in them. This means that even though the stick can move 360 degrees around, the actual housing that the stick is in is a square. So if you want to do a DP, you press forward and then you just move the stick down and slam it into down forward. And that's like a hard corner that you can lock into and find really easily. So it's like much, much easier to do a DP on a stick than it is to do it on, like a PS4 controller or a PS5 controller. So
funny,
it's just one of those things.
I am actually using a PS4 controller.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like that gets more complicated when sticks, analog sticks themselves are like housed in like circular housings, because like you can't find that corner super easily. So I do understand that concept. And it's funny that you bring up controller discourse as this thing, because we now live in an era where like third-party controllers are not those shitty Mad Cats, like, Pelican controllers that we used to have back in the day, where it's like, okay, you get like this translucent purple controller that you like, curse your friends when they come over to play.
You are like exactly describing a controller that somebody gave me when I was like 12. Or
yeah,
something.
Exactly.
It literally,
and it's like its analog sticks are too small.
Translucent purple, got a bunch of fucking lights shining through the case. That's funny.
But it's interesting to see that, because we like live in this world now where like scuff controllers and elite controllers, and I think there's like now like the DualSense Edge, which is Sony's official PS5 like Pro controller. These things exist, and people are using them to, theoretically get a quote unquote competitive advantage. And there are people on both sides of this saying it like gatekeeps poor people from like rising to the absolute best level of ability in these competitive games. And that's totally valid. But there's also people saying like, well, if we do have the technology to use this, why don't we use this technology? Like, if this is something that the games enable, why shouldn't we strive to utilize them? because that's something that we've done in modern sports and stuff like that. Like training regimens are getting better, tools to get people into shape are getting better. You know, I don't think a pro controller is analogous to like using anabolic steroids to build muscle mass. You know what I mean? Like there's a very different degree there.
I mean, the discussion is always like, what do we want to see out of the sport? Because like the classic example is like, you know, they changed the rules to basketball and how basketball was played many, many times. There was a whole debate over whether dribbling should be a thing. And they also like basically every single like game designer nerd I know is fascinated by the history of basketball because the rules were changed so many times, specifically because they were trying to work out what game do we want to watch played. They were like, we can make the game as balanced as possible and we can make the game as fair as possible, but at the end of the day, what we want is a game that's exciting to watch and that maybe even if it isn't like the most like the highest integrity sport, at least appears to be a high integrity sport. So like, you know, we want people to watch basketball and be able to feel in their you know, in their minds and in their hearts that this is a, you know, a sport that is a genuine contest of skill between athletes. But we also don't want them to be like, you know, appreciating the sport like nerds. Like they're like, oh yes, I see that he is like, you know, the correct strategic decision was to play hot potato at the other end of the court to waste time on the clock. No, we want players to be shooting for the goal. That's what we want, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it becomes the question of like, what is the quote unquote real game? Like, what's the true game here? And it's kind of funny. I mean, this is something that you and I share, at least, Cuckoo, but you know, you have your background in doing lit crit and lit crit studies. I did a lot of game studies, and there's a lot of overlap between that academically. And so it gets to this question of like, what actually defines like the text of a game, or what defines the rules that we're actually operating on when we're all reading and trying to discuss this thing. And I think controller discourse is just sort of video games version right now in terms of like critical academia. The controller discourse exists in that space of like, how do we actually define the thing that we're discussing and how do we interface with it that gives us common ground? And that same thing, as you just said, like happened in sports, right? Like, what is the true game? Is basketball a game where we dribble, or is it a game where we shoot? And like, that's just a thing that happens in every single, you know, game media type that exists. So
yeah, well, it's basically just what do we want out of this thing? Because that's always like the discussions around like everything, including art and literature and everything, is that just like, you know, people get hung up on like, how do we get to the purest like sense of what literature is or what art is? Like, how do we define art? And anyone who's thought about these problems for long enough are just like, this is a subjective human problem. There's no particles that we can measure that will tell us what the correct answer is. This isn't science. So we just at some point have to decide, what do we want out of this? What do we want out of books? What do we want out of movies and paintings and sculptures and other shit like that? So like, totally. You know, let's make the rules based on what we want rather than trying to find like what is art in the pure sense or whatever, because we're never going to find it.
Oh, completely.
The surprisingly difficult part about just the entire conversation about either game balance or media analysis is are we even having the same conversation about the thing? Do we have the same base assumptions about what this conversation is even about and its goals? And it's
like have we
a
defined
universal problem in both of these fields.
Yeah, trying to figure out how to define the discourse.
I laughed so much at like recently published, well, last month, about 2 weeks ago, I published a video called "You Should Read This Is How You Lose the Time War." Now, I knew that people had split opinions about "This Is How You Lose the Time War," but I liked it, and also because this I'm proposing it as like part of a show based on audience feedback. I was like, I like the idea that people have split opinions about it because that will mean that I have more to work with, right? But like, I just laughed where within the space of like 2 minutes, I got one comment which was, oh my God, I hate that people like this book. I hate the praise it's getting. It's so bad. It's the worst written book I've ever heard or read. And then in the space of 2 minutes, just another person, oh my God, I'm so glad you're talking about this book. It's one of the best written books I've ever read. And I'm just like, yeah, that's just most art, really. Like, you know, it's either genius or terrible, depending on who you are.
Well, it's interesting that we bring this up in this context too, because we are, at least right now, talking primarily about online discourse where the barrier to entry is very low, right?
Oh yeah, everyone has an opinion these days. Everyone's a critic.
Yeah, everyone's a critic. Everyone has an opinion these days, and there's like no credentials, right? There's no authority. And I'm not saying that like in order to speak critically about something, you like need to go to college or something. But like a lot of these discussions, especially with more established forms of media and entertainment, come through, and they used to be debated in academia, right? Where like people at least had some sense of foundation of like how to discourse, and it was happening in these closed settings where people were coming together under, if not the same assumptions, the same relative degree of training, right, on how to talk about stuff. Whereas like online now, like, you know, soccer lover 42069 on Twitter can go online and post their, you know, seemingly academically worded diatribe about how basketball isn't a real game, with absolutely no critical training or really any actual thesis. And it looks the same as like something that someone with some sort of like authoritative sports studies background might also say. So long story short, like the internet enables a lot of chaff and noise in these discussions that makes it harder to talk about.
I mean, personally, I would rather that anyone can. I prefer the environment where anyone can have their opinion heard, rather than just it's the domain of a select few specially trained academics. Because, like, especially like, you know, because like, especially in the context of like queer history and so on, having all of the like criticism about like art happen behind closed doors in ivory towers in academia, where everyone's a cis straight white guy. Well, almost exactly. Everyone. Yeah, means that for a lot of art history, you just get people talking about the same, you know, canon, the literary canon of just like, you know, straight white authors. And the same thing happens in like the canon of philosophy and so on. And I think that it's healthier for everyone, including the cis straight white dudes, if you open that up to more perspectives and you start introducing more things than just what the accepted canon is. So I do prefer that we have the situation that we have now online, where anyone can potentially have an audience, although I'm not going to say that that's a perfect solution, because if I did, that would make me a libertarian. Just let the free market decide, you know.
For sure. No, I mean, I think I'm of two minds on it, where it's like, on one hand, it is good to have far more diverse opinions about media and critique. And it's important that we widen the canon of not only literature, but video games and movies and TV and all these things that we're talking about. But I do sometimes miss the more structured arenas of discourse, so to speak, that things like academia provide. You know, I think all of this comes with the caveat of like, if you are reading people argue about fighting games on Twitter and they're like, hitboxes are cheating, real players only use sticks, it's like, get out of here. Like, not everyone's voice is necessarily valid in this discourse if people are that heated about something so minor in terms of like controllers and stuff, you know. It's okay to dismiss you know, a lot of this like heated gut reaction discourse, as long as you understand the actual conversation at play, I think is what I'm trying to say there. So
for me, like a
it's
side
interesting.
struggle with a lot of stuff online, like on Twitter and YouTube, is just the fact that like people are so quick to sound off with negative takes, especially about things that they have never engaged with. And so, like, a huge
funny,
amount
though.
of people talking about things are people
I love
who
just tweeting out. I love just tweeting out JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is mid, and then just seeing people get mad about that. I am that guy.
Like, there's just it can be so frustrating just to watch, like, especially when you make like a big video essay about something and all the tweets, like all the responses, you just want them to be able to, you want to be able to just have them be tagged of like, this person watched 80% of the video, this person watched 2 seconds of the video, paused it, left a reply, and left. And like that's like a whole element of that, and like how there will be entire tweet threads about, and like conversations of people all like going on about how horrible a thing is, be like a piece of media or a YouTube video or something, where none of them have watched it. And it's just like, this is a vacuum of meaning. Like, this is just such an exhausting thing that people do, is having like a whole group of people all talk about something and they all have takes about it, but none of them have actually engaged with it on any level. So they're just writing headcanon fan fiction about somebody else's opinions about something. And it's just like, this is a non-conversation, and people often prefer to do this over like any other, like it's like, why go out of your way to signal boost a thing just to complain about it without engaging with it? So you also have nothing to say about it. It's just a bizarre behavior pattern.
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring that up too, because getting back to just using fighting games as an example here, or I mean, even Overwatch or, RTSs, I'm sure this happens in Age of Empires Online and StarCraft and stuff, where people will be like,
I could tell you about Age of Empires discourse, but I don't know how sustainable that is for a podcast.
I feel like every single game, especially competitive games online, you'll see people be like, oh, Mercy's, like it'll be a day into a season and they'll be like, Mercy's trash, Brig is OP, please nerf, please buff. And it's like, how much of this is valid, and like how much of this is you just being upset that you lost your ranking match and like haven't learned the matchup yet? Like how much actual knowledge are we working with here, or are people just speaking from the gut?
Oh, there's a whole thing to get into about like meta, and how to some extent like tiny changes being made to characters on a scale that would only affect the top percentages of players, where like the vast majority of players, how good you are at a character is more important than their week to week like stat changes. But everyone watches the same 5 content creators that shape the entire discourse around a game's community. And so you will watch every single time that the supposed meta changes. You can actively watch everybody change characters in the low ranks where it's actively a bad idea to just like play a character you don't know how to play instead of the one you know how to play because you're bad at the game. But they took 1 damage off of my shot pellets off of my SMGs, and so now this game's unplayable in silver. And I'm like, that's not how this works. It's not how this works at all.
Well, I mean, it's funny that we talk about this with Overwatch specifically, right? Like, I haven't played since season 2, since the last time I was in a video with you and the crew.
Because you're a VTuber now.
Because I'm busy and I have a Twitch channel. like and subscribe, twitch.tv/toastedringtail. I'm live every day at 5.
But before you were asked to be on this podcast, you were like, yes, I can make some time for you peasants.
Yes, exactly. I'm a big time Twitch VTuber with 15 concurrent viewers. But the thing with Overwatch too is that you'll see people be like, oh, if you want to win this game, just play Sojourn, like just switch to Sojourn. You're playing Brig, there's no way you can play, and we're in like a bronze 3 ranking match. Like, it's like,
where Sojourn's literally too hard to play.
Exactly. Like, you're not the infinitesimally small like frame data and like damage differences that are made between characters are not going to fundamentally change your interactions on a matchup by matchup and character by character level, right? Like, this thing happens with fighting games all the time. Like, just using Guilty Gear as an example, like Nagoriyuki, who was like the top tier next to Happy Chaos for all of season 2, got nerfed. And people were immediately the next day being like, this character's unplayable. Like you can't play as him anymore. Like Nagoriyuki is free. And it's like, I'm playing in, on the Celestial floor, which is the highest rank on the online ladder. And I'm not amazing. Like I'm a pretty okay Guilty Gear player. And like Nagoriyuki is most certainly not free now, even outside of the pro ranks. You can't just pick against Nagoriyuki and win. Like that's not how balance fundamentally works, especially when you're playing a full game. But I feel like a lot of people at the lower levels who aren't actually grinding and they're just watching, content creator punditry will be like, oh yeah, like this is how the game is played now. And it's just, this is a huge change. And it's like the changes that are really big to pro players will not matter to you because you don't actually understand how the whole game is played and how all of these things interact at a holistic level, right? So buffing Zenyatta's kick in Overwatch does not fundamentally change his matchup with like a Mercy in Bronze 5. Like it's not,
it creates situations where it's like, sir, we're still in the tier where we're trying to teach you not to trickle.
Exactly. Like your shot accuracy is 20%. Like this does not make a difference.
There are significantly more important places where you have more impact than the balance of the character, as opposed to like, definitely. There's a level where people are so good that they're hitting like the skill ceilings of the game. And at that point, the literal bounds of what's possible become restrictions essentially. And a character just stops having the ability to hit certain breakpoints within a certain amount of time and will just get punished too fast. For 0.00% of the players.
My favorite example from Age of Empires 4 recently was actually they released some expansion civs, and legit, I think the Malians went from like top tier please nerf to bottom tier please buff to top tier please nerf to average within the span of one patch, because people first were just like looked at what they were capable of in matches where nobody was rushing them, and they just got to sit back and make an economy. And it was worked out that if you don't rush them, they have the best economy in the game. And people were like, oh, this civ is very clearly OP, please nerf. And then people figured out, oh, I can just rush them. And then they became bottom tier. And then people figured out how to play them properly, and they became top tier. And then people figured out how to play against them properly, and they became average. But like nobody acknowledged that was that's what was happening. People were just like, the Malians are OP, please nerf, and then the Malians are underpowered, please buff. And just, mindlessly regurgitating what the discourse was without like being like, maybe we should shut the fuck up and let the meta settle before we start making discourse about this,
I think about this too. The example I always go back to is like Super Smash Bros. Melee. And Super Smash Bros. Melee is a really, really fascinating fighting game when it comes to looking at how meta has evolved and how people's understanding of the game has changed over years.
Hasn't had a patch in like 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even if you want to consider like the European, the PAL release of the game, a patch, the overall tier list of Melee stayed very consistent for like 15 or 16 years. However long it's been since release. I think it came out in 2002, so it's 21 years old. It can drink. Jesus. But the game stayed relatively stable for a very long time. And then in recent years, with the rise of net play and with the rise of people like really innovating, for years and years and years, Yoshi was considered like Z tier terrible. AMSA started doing well. AMSA won a super major. Now Yoshi's considered like 7th or 8th on the tier list. Like he might even be, I think right now people are saying like he edges out Samus, who is considered like the last viable character on the tier list. And it created this discussion of like, what is a tier list, and are tiers real, and do they even matter? And my hot take here is that like tiers are real in the like conceptual sense. There are always going to be characters in whatever game, it doesn't matter if it's a fighting game or a shooter, that are better than other characters that are just happen to be more well suited to what the game is asking the player to do in order to win, right? And that is always going to be true of every video game, every real life game, every tabletop game. There are always going to be options that are centralizing and strong based on the design that is in play. But the cool thing about meta and meta evolving is that you slowly begin to chip away at what the game actually is. And different evolving and revolving metas are different ways that players and people who are interfacing with these games circle the drain on what the game truly is asking and what truly excels. Now, I don't think that it's really theoretically even possible for like you to truly solve 100% of a game and win every single interaction you've ever had 100% of the time. It's just not humanly possible. But it's really interesting to see,
except for stuff like Connect 4 and Checkers.
Yes, exactly. Like it scales with the complexity of the game, right? And the mind games at play. If there's a human element there, and the game enables it, things will always be evolving. But it's intriguing to see how those meta situations affect how people perceive the game. And very, very often, it's hard to have a meaningful, truly insightful conversation about something, especially in terms of like deep discourse, if you're doing it, you know, even within like a year or two of its release, right? So back when I was like reviewing games for a site that just doesn't need to be fully mentioned, there was there were often conversations that very deeply, immediately impacted topical current events, right? Like, it's like, okay, like this game is bad because X, Y, and Z happened related to the development, and we're all very angry about that a week after the game comes out. And I always wanted to say, like, this is very important to discuss, but in terms of the game's long-term legacy, we should maybe consider what the discourse of this game will be like in 20 years, right? Like, how are we going to be talking about Call of Duty, 27, 20 years after it comes out? Is it going to resemble the conversation that we're having right now? Or is it going to be like games like Daikatana, where like at release, their conversations and their discourse was completely vitriolic because people thought it was going to be incredible. And it wasn't. It was a very, very poorly put together game. And now, 20 years later, we look at it as like a historical artifact of like a certain period of design and a sort of interesting historical piece of conversation to kind of deep dive. Like, the value of a discourse, I think, scales with the time away from it that we are. The amount of time removed we are from a certain thing. And that absolutely, I think, applies to competitive games, especially after the games are quote unquote finished and are past their life cycle in terms of like live service and stuff like that.
I mean, it can even like, I would say that even applies more so to books, considering that like books are one of the oldest, like, well, not one of the oldest, excuse me. They are actually much more recent than most forms of art, but they have a bigger backlog of like older works produced by people who have been dead for centuries.
Yep.
Yeah, and I always have to correct myself when I say like oldest, because I'm like, no, as like novels are actually a relatively recent, historically speaking. It's just that they're older than movies, and movies have been around for as long as we've been alive. But
I mean, like, in terms of pop art, right? Like, you can say in terms of pop art or entertainment art, in the modern sense, they're relatively old. But in the grand canon of artistic endeavors, relatively new.
Yeah, but it's always a little bit like, there's always like discussions of like, is this author, problematic, and there's do you support their work, and then there's, well, this author's been dead for 200 years, so I can buy a copy of their book guilt-free.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
The evolution of discourse about books is also
intriguing.
just fascinating, where like a huge percentage of the literary canon that we treat as being like the all-time greats, because basically they were a combination of pop culture and high school, has told us that they're the most important books were like complete flops when they came out. They were like actively disliked and received scathing reviews, or were just straight up ignored. And then like we overlook how much like bizarre logistical things are the real reason why some things are prevalent the way that they are. Like akin to how a movie or a show will completely fail and then become some sort of like weird like syndicated rerun thing 10 years later, and now it's a classic because this one channel wouldn't stop playing reruns of like A Christmas Story or something. Like some like books have a bizarre individual narrative each time of how they even became the legacy they are, and it's not necessarily tied to what's in them.
So my favorite example of that for books is that where the logistics kind of influence the work in ways that people don't really think about today unless you like look it up, is a lot of the works of Charles Dickens are apparently very long. Now I haven't read all of them, so I haven't verified this. But stuff like Great Expectations, and which I also haven't read, long. But Christmas Carol, his most famous story, very, very short. And people are like, did he like intend for it to be this short for like an artistic reason as opposed to his other works? It turns out that no, the reason A Christmas Carol is short is because he footed the bill on publishing that one. So if the book was really, really, really long, it would have been way, way, way more expensive for him to publish. And so for his own financial reasons, decided to keep the book really, really, really short to save on printing costs.
It's funny that you bring this up because the idiom at least in the film industry is like there's no better editor than budget. Because it just drastically like affects how you come to these things, and like it's very easy to forget that, right? Like it's funny, people will come up with all of these artistic or like interpretive reasons why things are the way they are, but very often, it kind of ironically during history, it's just like, yeah, I had $5 to my name and like couldn't film this shot, or like really I used royalty free, audio here because I couldn't afford the licensing, and that like drastically impacts how we view media. So it's kind of interesting.
Almost any piece of writing seems to benefit from a kill your darlings moment of just, I need to get rid of like 2 chapters of this at least. And then suddenly it's I need
to hit a deadline, right?
Yeah. But it's like, because pacing is such a thing, like oftentimes like there's just like almost any movie needs just some overindulgent element removed. Like every essay I've written had like 2 chapters I just gave up on at the last second and just deleted, even though it was written to have them in there. But I'm like, I'm just keeping these here out of stubbornness or because it's self-indulgent and I like this part, but it's not even the point of the thing I'm writing. Shorter is often better.
Or the thing that haunts me, especially considering that like a lot of literature is concerned with like the authorial voice, is how many works actually have editors who no one knows, because the only name that gets put on the cover is the author, and you have to kind of almost go out of your way to find out how many editors a book had and who they were. But in the meantime, people are just discussing, what was John Green's authorial intent, and, did John Green intend this or that or whatever. Even though John Green is one of the authors who is the most open about the fact that all of his books are hugely collaborative processes and always makes sure to name, like, this person inspired this thing, this person inspired that thing. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of John Green, and I know you probably have a higher opinion of him than me, Keith, I do. He was the guy who kind of started me on this thought when I watched a video of his where he was like, yeah, when I wrote Looking for Alaska, a lot of the stuff that people say is fantastic about the novel, I didn't actually come up with. Most of the things that people love about Looking for Alaska were somebody else came up with, and I just used in the book, including the title. He did not come up with the title Looking for Alaska. That was I forget who that was, but it was someone else. And you know, he's one of the authors who's the most open about the fact that, you know, even though we treat novels more so than most other mediums as like a purely authorial form of art, it's not. It's just it's entirely you know, team effort, collaborative process, inspirations everywhere. You know, and it kills me when people talk about this in terms of like films, because people do try and authorize directors to the same extent that they authorize authors. But films are even more of a team effort. They're even less authorial than books, and books are already like less authorial than people think.
Yeah,
definitely.
I've heard many a podcast by John Green where he details the exhausting process of literally rewriting each book multiple times because of the editorial process.
I think about this in relation to Twin Peaks a lot, which has also come up a lot in the past few weeks. Yesterday, by the way, was Twin Peaks Day, or the day before yesterday, I should say, at the time of recording. February 24th, R.I.P. Laura Palmer. Anyway, Twin Peaks is really interesting. Yeah, it's the day the first episode starts. But the interesting thing with Twin Peaks is that people often attribute it to David Lynch. They're like, oh, this is David Lynch's baby. He made Twin Peaks. It's all him, like straight out of his mind. That's why it's so quirky. But the writer's room for Twin Peaks was primarily headed by Mark Frost, the co-creator of Twin Peaks. And David Lynch only has writing and directing credits on like 3 or 4 episodes of the first 2 seasons. So he was actually a minority writer on Twin Peaks. And people often attribute a lot of the choices in the show to him. And that's fair. He was the showrunner and the executive producer. So he decided basically what made it in. But a very large majority of Twin Peaks' creative decisions come from this like group of people like Harley Peyton and Mark Frost, Haley Peyton. I can't remember if I have the name right. And others who worked on this show that just have absolutely nothing to do with like Lynch's grander canon, right? Like, so it's funny when you talk about people authorizing directors or even critically using authorial intent as a like critical lens, especially in these collaborative efforts, because people will be like, okay, David Lynch in Blue Velvet frames this shot this way, and in the context of this, it means this thing. So if you look at Twin Peaks episode, you know, season 1, episode 5, they do the same thing and it must mean the same thing. And it's like, well, actually that shot was directed by a second unit director, and this episode was written by a completely different person, and David Lynch was off working on Lost Highway at the time. So like, there's really no way for you to authorially read this scene from a credibility perspective from whatever this author's intent was based on their other works, right? And that's just like sort of interesting to think about, because a lot of this discourse, you just talked about like authorial intent. I think it's interesting because like authorial intent very much can matter, but it also doesn't matter, because people will like never actually get the right authorial intent of something. And even if they do acknowledge that, it doesn't matter to how they're going to interpret it anyway. Like, that's just not how we interface.
There are so many factors at play that make it impossible to like reverse engineer what authorial intent is. And my favorite example of this comes from, I interviewed Peter S. Beagle, the author of The Last Unicorn, on my channel.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
And I'm sure he's told this story many times, not just to me, because, you know, he's been around for ages and he's done a lot of interviews. But he talked about this where he attended a like talk at a university, a lecture, where somebody was talking about one of the books he had written, which was not The Last Unicorn. And one of the characters in this book had a name that was like the name of this old Greek goddess, and the lecturer spent ages like explaining to the lecture theater and all the people attending that clearly Peter S. Beagle's intent with this name was to call back to this myth and create this meaning and create this narrative and so on, and that he said to the person afterwards, listen, that was a great talk, but I think you should know that the reason I chose that name is because I was trying to think of a name for a female character, and the first thing that I remembered was this like Greek girl from my high school I had a crush on.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that there's definitely like, you know, there are definitely works out there that I mean, a creator can be super authoritative on. A living person can say, this is what my story was about. Here are all the decisions that I made. And this is exactly why this means X, Y, and Z. And like that existing doesn't necessarily mean that other interpretations aren't also valid. Like people often take a very black and white stance when it comes to death of the author, right? They're like, oh, literally what the author says doesn't matter. This meaning isn't important. And it's like, well, it can be important, but it doesn't mean that other readings can't also be important. And so it's always interesting to you know, read film, lit, whatever criticism from this perspective of a like half understood postmodernist stance, where people who don't really, you know, aren't actually critically engaging with something. They're just sort of parroting these tropes and these ideas and these frameworks. When it's like actually kind of the beauty of media is like finding that middle ground and figuring out where this intent might lead to, but also drop off, and like what you bring to the table when you're actually discussing and trying to understand something. So it's interesting. I mean, there's a reason why modernist discourse and like formalist discourse still happens. Like people forget that these like lit crit movements don't go away and aren't actually necessarily like obsolete in the traditional sense. Just because we have moved on to postmodernist discourse doesn't mean that people aren't criticizing things from a modernist lens anymore, or that discourse isn't meaningful in some sense. So I mean, it's kind of interesting.
My big frustration with the Death of the Author essay is that nobody fucking reads it, even though it's 4 pages long and available on
Exactly.
Google.
Well, people aren't even interested in the actual purpose of that argument. More often than not, nowadays, when someone invokes it, they're actually just moralizing, engaging with the piece of media because of the author's behavior, which is not even what the premise is.
Not what it's about at all. Yeah, exactly.
No, but also like you can tell like who hasn't read it, because like they'll say some shit like, you know, Roland Barthes proposed this idea. He actually didn't. He was describing something that was happening at the time he was writing.
Yes.
From my understanding, people in literary academia were moving towards a less author intent centric way of criticizing works, and Barthes was just the guy who like
captured the discourse.
He like, this is what is happening. I'll refer to it as Death of the Author, and people liked that so much that they were like, yes, let's do that. But a lot of his a lot of his essay, especially the first bit, was just sort of talking about how, when you think about it, it is actually a bit odd that we place so much value on authorship, because this is a relatively recent phenomenon in human history where we authorize the creators of works and say that they are the authorities on these works, which is where we get the derivative word author. But like he was like, you know, something interesting that's happening actually is that this person is talking about this book in this way, and this person is talking about this in this way, and so on. And I think that there's a movement, that there is an emerging movement that's moving away from authorial intent and towards, you know, reader response. And I think that this is a good thing, basically. And then now everyone, but the way people talk about it is they're like, so we all were only talking about authorial intent, and then this one guy, Roland Barthes, came along and said, hey, guys, let's maybe not do that. And now, today, we know better.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? Like, people have this very linear perspective.
Yeah.
Like, it's this linear perspective of how, like, you know, media and criticism and even just discourse in general develops, when it really isn't linear at all. So I mean, I guess this gets to the kind of end of this thought train, which is like, I'm sure the way people talked about Plato back in Plato's heyday is not the way we talk about him now, you know? Like, it's just, there's no real way to view this linear perspective of how discourse evolves, when in reality, it's just chaos and noise all the time.
The idea that it's fascinating how like something like Star Wars even like becomes like this monolith where everyone has the same opinion and it is just a legend, it is just a classic, period. And it's like, that's definitely not what it was like when it came out. Like that's not how anything works. But like I had to grapple very directly with authorial intent and death of the author and so on, obviously, because like in the entirety of the Beastars video, I am doing a read that I do not necessarily think is the point of Beastars, and I'm doing that willingly and knowingly, despite the many people that will like obviously act like I'm misinterpreting it as if I didn't know what I was doing in the video and so on. But very specifically, everything I had analyzed.
Legoshi never actually is romantically attracted to a guy.
Every single fucking reply, it's like, he gets engaged with the rabbit girl. What the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, that's not even the conversation I'm having, sir. That's not even the point of any of this.
Thanks for the clickbait.
I award you 0 points. I need to have an infuriating clickbait, like, this isn't even what the video is about, but it'll make bad faith comments happen that annoy me forever on every video, because clearly it's good for the algorithm, but because it clearly worked.
Oh, dude.
But what happened?
I'll let you finish. But
it's just that what happened after that though is like I got like 15,000 words deep into the Ad Astra video before I clicked for me for a moment, where I'm like, oh. Everything I've discussed so far is a thing where realistically the creator will not ever see the thing I'm talking about. And so I'm just engaging with step media the way that people normally engage with media, which is that some phantom creative team makes a thing, and then completely separate from that, you have your reaction to the thing, and you share the same audience, but you never cross spheres. But then I realized my new video is about a thing that is written by one person, and I think there might have been an editor that got involved at some point. I actually don't even know if there is an editor at all for Ad Astra, or if it was genuinely written by one person completely and exclusively, and then someone else did art, and someone else did background art, and someone else did the interfaces, and someone else chose the music. And it's like, I'm like, this is such a small indie project. There is a very non-zero chance that the creator will watch this video and perhaps most horrifyingly of all, respond to it. and it's like, one, just like with the Beastars video, my analysis of a thing and what's significant about what happens in the story is not contingent on whether or not it was intended by the author, except at times where I imply the intent of the author because I'm just grasping at the idea of like, this seems to be like the point in like, or especially when you're like, if you're like saying somebody's kind of a genius for something, or like this, or here's what was so clever about what they did, and like they could easily just as much be like, yeah, nah, I didn't even think about any of that. What?
Yeah.
Like I think it's like when I think Chuck Palahniuk or whatever, the creator of Fight Club, I probably got the last name wrong, like talked about like,
you got it right.
How like David Finch like brought out themes in his work that he didn't even know were in it when he adapted it into a movie. And it's like, sometimes maybe the creator's best thing they could do is just quietly be like, yeah, definitely,
exactly,
definitely meant to do that.
Well, it's interesting because Chuck Palahniuk too, like, you know, people read bad faith, you know, discourse essentially into Fight Club for so long, and that was also expanded by the movie's release because the movie was such a huge hit. And then like nowadays, Chuck Palahniuk is like, I thought I wrote a book about one thing, and then like I publicly came out as gay, and now if you read Fight Club, like every time I read Fight Club now, I think it's a gay novel about being gay and what masculinity means in a gay context. And like literally no one, not even Chuck Palahniuk, was saying that when it first came out, you know? And it's funny, we talk about meta evolving, but like critical discourse has a meta too. And it's funny to see how it changes over time.
But the behind
optimal strat for getting people to respond to your discourse.
Well, now I'm out. Haha. Yeah, the whole behind the scenes thing is I cut an entire chapter from the essay where I bring up Inio Asano's Downfall, a book by Inio Asano, not his personal downfall.
Right.
But it's a distressing single volume manga that feels autobiographical, as dangerous as it can be to read into things as being autobiographical or not. But it is about a mangaka who hates himself and hates the things that he works on and hates people's responses to the things that he works on, which is a bit of a thing for a mangaka to make. And it's in like spoilers for this book, I guess, but it's not really a plot book at all. It's just a series of it's just an episode of this guy's life and his misery. But like it has, and especially is not even the story of the thing. It's just what it ends on is this note of like he's at a signing, because it's somebody who finished a popular series that he hated working on, and he's trying to come up with a purpose for his life and next thing to work on essentially. And he's it ends at a book signing for this property that he just fucking despises, and there's this young girl who is there to have her book signed, and she's just gushing over this thing that like changed her life and was incredible and it's so impactful and it really helped her get through the like tough times, and like that kind of like conversation that you have about creative works oftentimes. And he's just like, fucking idiot, you don't get it at all. And then the fucking manga just ends. Like it just ends on that note, and I'm like, oh, I'm writing about, like, I just read this manga and I'm like, I'm currently writing about a gay furry adult visual novel that broke me and kind of directly led to this sort of like impulsive coming out and was like the straw that broke the camel's back or whatever. And the creator can just respond to what I say about it. It's kind of terrifying. So it was like this is like a response to several topics we brought up today, but like it was like a kill your darlings moment where I cut this chapter because it ultimately wasn't like part of the like momentum of the overall video, but I had to like write it to get through writing the rest of the video. Because like,
yeah,
it was a weird headspace to be in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting too, because I mean, especially in the furry space, right? Like, I mean, you're speaking about Ad Astra and things where, how do I explain this? Like things where the creators are very accessible, right? But then we also, it's interesting in the furry context because furries, I think as a community, are often more accessible to each other than a lot of other like communities, right? Like you can be an author of a published novel and go to conferences and, you know, be in offices of publishers and like never meet your darlings, right? Like you can never meet your heroes. It's totally possible for Stephen King to have never met John Green or something like this, right? But in the furry space, especially if you're going to furry conventions or on furry Twitter or like are commissioning artists, you have a very direct and personal chance of meeting these people whose works very drastically affect your life. Because even though the furry fandom is huge, it's small comparative to, you know, larger, more established and institutionalized industries. So that's also like an interesting minefield to navigate because, you know, without getting into it, it's totally possible to like meet someone whose work you fucking love in the furry fandom and then just find out that you like cannot stand them or their takes or, you know, anything like that. Even if it's not controversial. Like I'm not talking about someone being an awful person. I'm just saying like, man, there are so many artists who I would like love to commission, and then I commission them, and then like 2 weeks later I unfollow them because I'm like, I just don't like what you talk about. I'm sorry. Which doesn't necessarily happen in the same way when, you know, it comes to Stephen King or something. Like, of course, there are celebrities and there are actors and authors who you follow, and they say something bad, and then you unfollow them. But like, there is less of a direct chance of you forming an actual relationship with them that is impacted by this than there is in, you know, the furry space or even in like indie games or YouTube Let's Players or other parasocial environments that the modern internet has sort of enabled.
How many people have I done that to? It's very different.
I'm sorry.
It's like nowadays.
I'm sorry, Keith. I'm gonna have to unfollow you for all of your bad takes.
It was just the thought. Once upon a time, you just followed someone's
literally
gallery.
like I'm so bad at reaching out to people that just on a whim, when I saw that like Keith like was a furry video essayist who branched out of topics that were just the furry fandom, I was like, maybe I should reach out. Maybe I should give this networking thing a try. And literally that was the message that I sent to him. Like, hi, I've noticed you're a furry video essayist. I am too. I think that this is how networking works.
Well, exactly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it ends up working out too, though, right?
Weird in this space. It's so weird because like half the time it's like a weird parasocial relationship thing where like, because YouTube's so comically fragmented, you can be very aware of someone and you're like, are we peers? Is this a thing? Should I reach out to this person? Especially in the bizarre element of like, if you're a Let's Player, like for the years before I had any video essays out, so that were like their own like scripted works, it was just like, what I do is you just hang out and talk for a while like this too, or like, but with video games most of the time. And like, that's kind of like a weird, like play date thing. Like you're like trying to like, hi, will you be my trial friend? like, because we don't.
You're my friend on friend probation.
Yeah, we don't like pretend to get along. Like this is when you do Let's Plays, you just actually get along with people. Hopefully, and that's like the point: is you're hanging out and playing games, and that's what collaborations are in that particular field. And so, like with certain gaming related people, there like I have had a slew of embarrassing emails over the years where I would just reach out to this or that creator and attempt networking and either get shut down or completely ignored. And I've also completely ignored a few people over the years, and it's just like a really weird thing to navigate. And it's like you don't know what to do half the time because it's like you don't want to articulate why you didn't respond to somebody.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, it's funny too because it's like,
and you never know if the people you didn't respond to you because they just didn't even see it in just the endless spam of stuff, or if they just specifically don't like something about you, or they've heard something about you, or they didn't like what they saw, or if you message someone on Twitter, you don't know if because Twitter secretly has like so there's the real inbox of DMs, then there's the request inbox of DMs. Then there's the super secret extra inbox of DMs that you don't get email notifications for, which is that you have to scroll to the bottom of all of your requests that you haven't like deleted or whatever, and then then it says a show more that is like a spam box, which can be full of legitimate people and not like bots and so on. And it's every now and then I'll like do the archival work of getting into that spot to find that place, and I'm like, oh. Yeah, I didn't see this person for 3 months.
Well, I mean, it's funny too because like on one hand, sending out those random, hey, you want to network with me is like how you get James Somerton to voice Legoshi in your essay. But then like I joined the collaborators of the server because I happened to be in the right place at the right time and taught you how to use VR chat. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to how you actually integrate or become a content creator or like collaborate with people. You just happen to do it sometimes, and 95% of the time it's just raw chance that you happen to catch someone's attention at the right time.
Makes everyone try to shoot their shot. And you're like, oh, God.
Exactly.
No. Everyone's trying to break down the audience versus creator barrier. And it's just a lot. Like Definitely. Last time I let you all in, you didn't behave. you cannot just let random people in onto the show unfiltered. They do not behave themselves. They get the chance to troll and they immediately do that. Yeah. There's a reason why we don't use the audience can type directly onto the stream features of like Jackbox 3 that mysteriously never came back in future Jackboxes.
Yep. And that's why I am completely edited out of every single episode of all of the Let's Plays we're in because I'm just too loose of a cannon and I wasn't vetted before I joined the channel. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. That was a joke, by the way. I have only been in the videos that I'm published in. Keith does not edit me out of anything.
Unless, I mean, you don't check.
Unless.
Yeah. How would we verify
actually,
this information?
This wonderful
This is a weird
podcast with
podcast
only
of Cuckoo
Cloud
talking
Cuckoo
to
Country
nobody
and
for most of the podcast.
Keith has edited himself and Toaster out completely. We'll construct a post-mortem video essay out of this, just out of voice lines from Cuckoo here. But yeah,
You're going to use this to
interesting.
train like an AI voice thing to make a video essay on like Ad Astra, where it's like, oh yeah, it's really good and I liked it and the prose was great, and then you can be like, see, this, you know, barely notable book critic really likes Ad Astra.
That makes my opinion
good,
even more
actually.
correct.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. We'll
I still
deep fake your voice for Let's Plays.
knuckled down and played / read Ad Astra, but I am looking forward to it and my expectations are extremely high. I'm sure that won't backfire.
Oh man, it's been a while since I've read a visual novel. I mean, I guess the last one I read was Echo. Yeah, now that I think about it, and it's been about 6 months since I finished it. That sounds about right. Maybe longer. It's been like 7 months, I think. Lately, I've just been reading actual books. As I said, I went
They don't even
on a
have
vacation.
pictures of chess in them.
and-
How do you get through them?
Yeah. Well, one of the books that I'm reading right now, Night Film by Marisha Pessel, is sort
Marisha
of
Pesci. Wait,
Pesci,
no, that
thank
is an
you.
L, isn't it? Is it an L or an I?
I'll have to
fucking-
look it up. I think it's an L, but it is an L. Yes. I've been reading Night Film, and that's like a sort of hypertext fiction. Again, kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier, where the book
It is
itself.
Pestle. Oh my god.
Yeah.
I
It
called her
has-
Marisha Pesci in my video. I'm so embarrassed.
It has like an app that you use. Granted, the app is no longer works because it was made for old devices, but you can find an archive on the internet of all of these like QR codes basically that you could scan in the book and then get like news articles that are being referenced in the text, or like sound clippets or videos that relate to the ongoing narrative. And that's been really interesting. But yeah, that's the book that I'm reading right now that I'm really enjoying. But yeah, over the past few months, I've just been reading actual like straight up novels. I've been getting use out of my Kindle, which for a while was just not happening because everything in my life has been so busy for the past like 3 months.
I think I have to come to terms with the fact that I am actually like the clumsiest reader I know. I had to re-record the entire segment of my video on S because I pronounced the mysterious author character's name Straska, even though there's no second S in his surname. I was just like the entire time going Straska, and then looked on a whim, decided to look up what have other people said about this book, and saw people pronouncing it Straka, and I was like, wait, there's no second S in his name? I read the entire book and didn't realize.
Well,
Names
it's
could be a struggle
it's-
too. Like,
I relate to that so deeply. Like, it's ridiculous. I once wrote an essay about Pathologic 2, where I went very deep and like did a lot of research on the Russian and then steppe culture linguistics going on so that I could pronounce the various steppe words really correctly. Like, for example, there's a lot of words that start with KH, which if you read them phonetically, a lot of people read them as like K, but it's actually like H. So, like, there's a word in Pathologic that a lot of people read as Katanger, which is actually pronounced Katanger, which is, like, great. But then I, like, totally forgot about that. And the town that Pathologic takes place on is called the town on Gorkhon. But I just pronounced it as the town on Gorkon the whole way through. And it's just like, sometimes that just fucking happens. You just like can't be asked to go back through. People will be clumsy when they're reading. It's fine.
I just
You don't need to
uploaded
worry too much
200
about it.
videos of just getting corrected the whole time. I just plowed
Exactly.
through all three routes of the first game and then the sequel, and everyone's just like, Yeah, no, none of this is how any of this is pronounced. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm not Russian. I can't.
Oh, I'm positive that like probably 10 of those comments are me just being like, oh, hey, just so you know, this is how this is pronounced, without
Like,
even realizing that I'm doing it. Like,
well,
just
as
engaging
Toaster
to
is aware,
engage.
I confided in him specifically for Ad Astra to be like, okay, you're more of a linguist than I am. How the fuck do you pronounce any of these names? I need to get as correct as possible.
Yeah, I mean, for that stuff, I just kind of looked up things, and I'm sure none of that would even match the authorial intent, right? Like, what if, you know, just using this as an example, like, I'm pretty sure in ancient Roman, which is the language that it is based off of, or classical Roman, I should say, or Latin, like, Virginia would be pronounced Virginia.
Oh,
but like,
geez.
I very highly doubt
That would have
that-
generated comments.
exactly. Like,
Everyone
I
would be
highly
losing their
doubt
shit
the
if I
author.
pronounced it Virginia.
Exactly. Like, I doubt that Howley was thinking like, oh yes, like her name is Virginia,
They'd be like,
or just
"Has
like
Keith never
Kato
heard
versus
this name before?
Kato.
What is wrong with him?"
Stuff like that. Like, at some point, you just have to look it up and be like, okay, I'm gonna go with this and say it's right.
Neferu,
and, like, assume.
Neferu.
Yeah, or like, I mean, Chemia is like a great example. Like, if
Chemia or
Neferu
something.
is supposed to be Egyptian, then KH would be pronounced Kh, so it would be Chemia, not Chemia or Kimia.
And
but
now
like,
with,
how
and
much
now
of this
with
do we
Echo,
know?
we have a tug of war between me and the comments of whether or not it's pronounced Micah or Misha.
Yeah, in my head it's Misha, but then like at the same time, like, is his name Leo Alvarez or Leo Alvarez? You know, like there's a lot of nuance
George or
here
Jorge.
that is just exactly George or Jorge, Jesus or Jesus. You know, like, it's hard to tell. So sometimes you just have to roll with it and say whatever.
Pronunciation's a nightmare, and it's not worth even trying. The end.
No, exactly.
You know
I
what
mean,
you
that
know
being
what I
said,
mean.
if you
That's it.
exactly. That being said, if you pronounce Japanese incorrectly, I will correct you, just because that's a pet peeve of mine.
I think that's stupid.
It is stupid.
I think it's very.
But I'm
every
taking
time,
a stand.
Every time I've ever played a JRPG and somebody has corrected me about the pronunciation of the names of the characters, and like they're saying it right in front of you, how are you getting it wrong? And I'm like, first of all, if you speak English and not Japanese, the Japanese line reads are incomprehensible to the point where you can't even spot the names in them most of the time. And like, at some level, I'm like, wait, but the Japanese voice acting constantly uses English, and their English is horribly wrong. So why does my Japanese have to be better than their English comment section? What's going on here? Like,
Yeah,
what is this standard?
Japanese English loanwords are very, very hard for Westerners to follow and to pronounce correctly, because we have this gut reaction to think like, oh, the word comes from English, so I should pronounce it like English. But like in actual spoken Japanese, just like using an example, the
also
word
their
for
names,
car,
like they don't pronounce our names as well as I pronounce their names. So
No way,
what is the
exactly.
standard?
Well, it's just funny because like I think about this a lot, where so the Japanese word for apartment is apato, as in like apartamento, apartment. But if I were to, in the middle of a Japanese sentence, be like, boku no apartment, people would be like, what the fuck are you saying? They don't understand, because that's not how their language works. And like this,
I mean, most foreign words get anglicized when they get put into English as well. Right?
Exactly.
Except Schadenfreude. We just really just stuck with that. Just a real mouthful of German that we just like. They have a word for this very specific emotion where you take pleasure in the pain of others, and we're not going to interrogate that. We're just going to take the full word wholesale and stick with it.
It's funny. It's funny to get into this. But by the way, I was completely joking about correcting people on Japanese pronunciation. I do not care about that.
Yeah, but the other people
whatsoever.
aren't. Unironically, people do that so much.
Oh yeah, completely. It's people will take any opportunity to show off how smart they are, and I love it because your comments are engagement. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Of all of the things I do, the greatest crime I can do is, one, pronounce the s in the middle of any Japanese name, or 2, incorrectly guess the gender of a Monster Hunter monster. Those are like the 2 most commented things that have ever happened outside of like saying The Last Jedi is good. Like, it is so much. Like, to the point where I had to, like, as a gag, just have like a scrolling text field of all of the comments people made about the same thing in Monster Hunter about just the gender of one monster. And I'm like, guys, I'm just playing a game. It's just called a thing. It's a dragon. It's fine. Jesus Christ.
Well, it's like when you go to someone's house that you've never been to before and you meet their pet dog and you're like, oh, how old is he? And they're like, that's a she. And you're like, okay, but like, I literally just saw your dog's face for 2 seconds just now. Like, I sometimes it just happens. Sorry.
The hard correction's a bit much. You can always just literally just respond with normal sentences where you happen to gender them correctly, and then people will just pick up like, oh, that's the hint we're getting here, and then you just quietly adjust without ever actually having a conversation about it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not even trying to get into like gender discourse here. It's just more like you're talking about a Digimon or a Pokemon. Like, sure, they might be sexually dimorphic in the grand scheme of things. Like, female Pikachus have a heart-shaped tail, but like, yeah, but people just think of Ash as Pikachu. So if I see a Pikachu in the game, I'm gonna be like, oh, look at him, it's a Pikachu. You know, it's whatever.
Well, in Monster Hunter, it's the everything can be male or female, except strange exceptions out of nowhere. Like Black Diablos is always female in Heat specifically, and the flagship monsters Rathalos and Raytheon are Rathalos is always male and Raytheon is always female. And they're separate names and appearances, but not that different of appearances. It's basically the same monster.
People who can play piano in Resident Evil are always female. That's how they're sexually dimorphic.
That's how you
in that
determine
gender.
gender.
Series.
You put a piano in front of the baby.
Exactly,
that's the gender reveal party. The piano has fireworks in it.
Capcom has great track record with capturing character gender here, so good for them. Oh man!
I'll put your poison discourse to the rest. Just put a fucking piano in front of that fighting game character. We'll know once and for all.
Good job, Capcom. You've set a standard. Oh man, it's just vile. But if I ask, it's just kind of funny. I mean, getting these kind of corrections in your YouTube comments, I think, is part of the YouTube meta of just informing and creating constant engagement.
We're like in the last half an hour, we have not talked about furry like at all.
Oh, we can talk about furry.
Quick,
stuff.
how did you become a furry?
Oh, this is a fun one. How did you become a furry?
Who, me?
Yes.
Sure.
Well, my first ever crush, and this probably says a lot, was Tiny the Tiger from the Crash Bandicoot series when I was like single-digit years old.
Man.
Yeah. That probably should have informed me of the direction my life was headed.
He is both shaped like and looks like a Dorito.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a fun one about me. Yeah, and that's the only sort of notable thing about like how I ended up becoming a furry. I think it was just kind of inevitability after that, considering that, you know, the grew up with the internet generation. Mm-hmm. Well, the first one. There's another one now. The sequel. Grew up with the internet generation, the sequel.
My entrance into the fandom was pretty lifelong. One of my close relatives is the creator of a extraordinarily prolific and famous anthropomorphic character-based comic book series that then spun off into an extraordinarily popular series of TV shows and films. You can probably do the math on that to figure out which series I am talking about. It does not particularly need to be discussed for privacy reasons, but long story short, anthros and furries have been a part of my life for a very long time. And I didn't really have a persona until a few years ago when I started to really like embrace it and stuff. But I think for me, it was just a matter of like, this is a normal thing. And like I remember first seeing like Anthrocon footage and like having relatives talk about going to furry conventions for work reasons, as young as like 7 or 8 years old, and probably honestly earlier. And so it's always been on my radar, but then over time, I started to identify with it more because I just like found it charming and found it to be an easy way to express oneself and like find media that was interesting, and like pleasant to look at and stuff. And, without getting too controversial here, like furries have been the best at organizing information and having databases of art. And I mean, just to put it plainly, the furries invented porn tagging before anyone else did. They are the best at creating a database of anything. And part of that is because
we have so many like different fetishes. We need to organize this.
Exactly. Like we need to be able to separate the peas from the carrots.
Yeah.
So I mean, but that goes without saying. That's not just porn. I bring that up as mostly a joke, but like, for affinity and then later on image boards and things like that were just so much better for accessibility, and tracking and figuring out what you liked and finding artists that you identified with and that you were interested in, not just for pornography, but for actual comics and art and stuff that you're interested in, than any other fandom or medium ever. Like literally nothing else has as good taxonomy and like even just like ontology in terms of like how we discuss things and how we define things than the furry fandom. So that kind of was a pipeline, I think, for me into becoming more into it, and then just kind of developed from there. I always joke about this, but like, furries are in IT so well. Like some furry out there needs to make a tag based video porn site to just take down the monopoly of like YouPorn and all these terrible porn sites that exist where you can't search for anything, because boy, do we have that industry on lock in a way that no other fandom or demographic has. Like we're so close to gaining the monopoly on it that we may as well take over.
It's very funny how it's just a reliable tool. Like if I'm like,
exactly,
I really want to retweet that one. Like this happened like yesterday. I was like, I really want to retweet that fucking Echo comic about Chase's goatee, but how do I find it? I know, I'll go on the porn site and I'll type Chase Hunter comic and it'll come right up. And then it literally in the sidebar has a link to the tweet that is the source. So I can go directly to the tweet and retweet the tweet because furries also care a lot about properly sourcing all artwork. And that's the thing that I try to stick to. It's like, it is not considered okay in this fandom / community to download pictures and then just post them as tweets and so on. Like you find the tweet and you share the tweet specifically so that the sourcing goes back to the person. And I was like, so I'm like, I gotta track it down. And Twitter also is unsearchable. But you know what the best search engine for Twitter is the furry porn site.
Yep. I mean, it's amazing too, though. It's like it's useful for finding people too. Like there have definitely been times where like I'm at a furry convention and I'm like, I think I recognize that fursuiter, but like I don't know why I recognize their character or their persona. So I go to the site and I search like red_fur jackal male solo, and then like find a picture of someone. I'm like, oh, that's who this person is. I know now. And then I can be like, oh, hey, I love your Twitter account or whatever. And it makes it easy to network, honestly. Like speaking about networking, it's so easy to find and figure out who people are and like find out how to get social access to them, at least, because it's in a way you've already seen everyone. In a weird way, you can recognize anyone.
And for me, I detailed this a bit in like the Beastars video, I guess, but like if you go all the way back, I guess my first fictional crush was probably Gambit from like the X-Men animated series, so it's not straight up furry. But I was just like, I'm really fixated on this character and I don't know why. This character that wears like a trench coat where underneath they have like pink armor and they're extremely flamboyant and showy. And it's like, I literally have a Gambit figurine on my shelf alongside what is mostly just furry shit. Otherwise, it's like Simon Belmont, Gambit, and like 50 monsters. Not 50. I don't have that many monsters. I don't have that many figures. But like once upon a time, I insisted on having Kimari in my party for all of Final Fantasy X. I when I got the preview Game Informer issue for Oblivion, there was just a big photo of a muscular Minotaur character, and I just kept going back to that page for some reason, just curious about it, just wanted to look at it more. And then when the Van Helsing movie came out, I bought like the novelization and like read that and so on, and it just like at some point led to me like looking up werewolves in like middle school on like the internet. I'm like, oh, I'll check out this internet thing where you can find images of a thing instead of thinking about the same images a lot. And then that led to just discovering furries that have been around forever because they're older than I am, and that's pretty old.
Yeah,
they've just been around forever, and so I just sort of drifted through the furry stuff for a while, and still am, and never. That seems pretty stuck. But yeah. I have this theory that I want to talk about more with people sometime, and like if I ever make a video about the fandom itself, this might be something to interrogate, because I have a theory about my own experience that it's this idea that like because being gay is so stigmatized, there might be a specific appeal, like it's like an excuse, like you're getting away with something, not even like an excuse you can tell to yourself that this isn't the thing that's bad, is like looking at a bunch of like muscular masculine beast men in fiction might feel like a more acceptable way to like satisfy something that you're like mentally you're drawn to. Whereas like if you like, it's like massively taboo to like be actually like going after like thinking about actual men and like fantasizing about actual men, but like in this weird sort of like tangential way where you're a confused teenager that doesn't even know what they're thinking half the time. You can like find yourself drifting towards this thing in denial because it feels like a more acceptable expression of this idea. Like, no, I just really like werewolves. Just love werewolves. And I've talked to a few people that have different versions of this, and I think it might be kind of like the undercurrent of why the furry community is just so fucking gay. But
totally.
More research required for correlation.
Well, it's funny that you bring this up because everyone knows who their first furry crush is. Like, I feel like that's a question you can ask any furry and they will immediately know the answer because it's such a universal experience. Like, I mean, for me, mine was Banjo. Like, it's so instant that in retrospect, I'm like, oh, wow, like so obvious. So, I mean, it's just funny. It just happens.
It's like that famous furry comic. I don't even know. I don't know if that's even an edited meme or what, but it's the, oh yeah, there it is. It's I found it. The famous comic of like a kid watching Robin Hood with the fox, and he's tied up, and the kid just says, "I feel weird."
Oh man, is that an Adam Ellis comic? I think it is.
Let's see. Nothing better than Disney's Robin Hood to activate the trigger. Furries know your meme.
I could be wrong. Maybe
it doesn't look like
maybe
Adam
I'm thinking
Ellis.
I think I'm thinking of the Batman one. I think his was Batman.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Some of these things are I'll post it in chat, but some of these are like endless conversations with each other, iterating on an idea.
Yep. Oh man. But yeah, I feel like it's a universal experience, right? Like we all stumble into the same thing, and that's how we form this odd community that we formed.
Yep. I mean, that's definitely the usual thing about when they have like documentaries that interview early furry community people that started coming together at conventions. It was the collective realization that they all shared a common interest in this specific thing, despite having no way of previously communicating with each other. Like it was simultaneously, and obviously it's like incredibly obvious if you just look through like the history of like fables and legends and like fairy tales and so on, that like anthropomorphic animal characters are just an ever-present thing across cultures forever. And then this is just like the very specific way that it's like the community has collectively evolved now that it's like joined together online. because it took the very specific form of being gay as shit.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too. Like, you bring up conventions. So in the past few months, I've been to more furry conventions and more furry meets recently, just trying to get more involved in the local scene. And it's intriguing too, because people forget when they're all online that like the furry community is like extraordinarily diverse in terms of interests. Like, a lot of us are united by our interest in furry art, but like the furry community as a whole is actually like 27,000 other tiny communities that are just like happen to be linked by this one thing. And so like I've been going to an event in Southern California called Maw, which I don't really know much about it. I don't know how often it's happened, but it's held at a barcade that has like a lot of rhythm games. So there's like a lot of rhythm game community people that like hang out there that like aren't even furries. They just like hang out because it's a fun time. And so you have like this interesting cross-pollination of like two different fandoms that like have come together under the banner of this like furry meetup that happens every few months in Southern California, just because like, why not just hang out with this many people who are all going to be playing rhythm games? And there's like some fighting game people there that I've met as well. And you know, going to furry conventions as well. I went to Further Confusion, which is held in San Francisco, or not San Francisco, it's like San Jose or something, but same general area. And it was really interesting because I went there and like, that's where I met Sonic Fox. And like, that's where like I met a bunch of like fighting game people that like I had no idea were furry or like related to this, but they all went because like there was a game room and you could play fighting games there. And like, if Sonic Fox is going to be there, why not play against other pros? And so like, it's like a weird marriage of like your own interests and like the furry aspect of it, especially at conventions, is really just a vector for meeting other people that you normally wouldn't cross paths with, which is just so interesting and like a really fascinating aspect of the culture that you don't really get at other really specific conventions. You know, I mean, you definitely get it at like, you know, anime conventions, and I'm sure people have their niche interests and meetups at like gaming conventions and stuff. But, you know, if you're going to a tattoo expo, generally a lot of the people are going to have the same big hobbies in common. Whereas at furry conventions, like the furry aspect of it is really only one aspect of what they're into. And it caters to a lot of different hobbies and a lot of different ideas outside of the anthro character, you know,
that was a jump scare. Did you hear that?
No. What?
Is that just me? That was weird.
Probably just you.
My mic might be picking up some cars outside.
Oh, it came back. I thought it played over Discord. There was it was the first microsecond of the bidoo Windows thing, and it played in sync with your stuff, so I thought it came through somehow.
Oh, no,
It's my bad.
nothing.
No, I've just derailed for something that's not related to anything. It's my fault.
This will be edited out in post.
No, it won't.
Be.
You know how time
like
consuming it is to listen back to this thing and be like, oh, what, should I remove stuff from this?
Oh man, this episode is gonna be so off the rails. Sorry, listeners.
How? What does that even mean? No, this is way more on topic than normal for this podcast.
I feel like we had like an hour and a half of discussion about lit crit discourse before we even got into the topic we said we would lead with, which is
that just means
stuff.
It's on topic. We were really on topic on that topic for like an hour. That's more focused than usual.
It wasn't even lit crit discourse. It was like competitive video game discourse for ages.
So whenever I come on the podcast, I invariably make it the Guilty Gear hour. So sorry, listeners, once again.
This is just the vibe. That was the thing. Mm-hmm. This is what the whole show is like. This. It's always like this. I only retroactively, desperately try to come up with a thumbnail and a title for the thing, trying to even make sense of what the thing is that we talked about for often like 3 hours in some cases. And I'm just like, and then people are like, where the fuck is the part where he even talks about Elden Ring? And I'm like, haha, gotcha. It's exactly 200 minutes in.
Just absolute engagement trap.
It's just, you gotta put a label on it somehow. You can't just, no one wants to click on dialog choices number 75. Whatever, man. Just an episode with no labeling of any kind.
But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like the podcasts, we generally find our way to a theme. I guess today's theme was like, what are you reading, playing, and furry analyzing?
Yeah.
So I guess that's pretty good.
I really hope the last 5 minutes of this podcast aren't us discussing this episode of the podcast.
It can be. We have the power. Just get metatextual about it. We are listening to the podcast while burning the podcast for light so that we can consume the podcast.
We should find a way to like loop around so we can listen to the beginning of the recording while we're still recording it. Then just give a running like director's commentary of the same episode of the podcast.
This podcast
can we make that happen?
An increasingly esoteric series of references to the beginning of this podcast. Looping onto itself until we're talking about the fact that we're referring to the podcast in itself later when it loops back around again. Like fucking Bo Burnham responding to his own video and then responding to his own video and then responding to his own video.
Literally a Bo Burnham gag, except instead of being 2 minutes long, it's several hours.
Yeah, it's just incomprehensible.
This episode of the podcast is the inside of Keith Ballard podcasts.
Yeah,
Good job.
It's the equivalent of doing row your boat for the duration of an EFAP episode. No one knows what
God.
This is becoming increasingly incomprehensible.
It's so niche. We have successfusly alienated everyone from the podcast. All right, goodbye, everyone. Good job.
Which itself is an early Daniel Tosh bit before the show when he used to make a joke so long that eventually only one guy's laughing, and then he just point at that guy.
We have now completely aged ourselves by referencing Daniel Tosh.
Yeah, remember when Daniel Tosh didn't have a show and
knows.
just was a weirdly smiling, slightly terrifying man?
Oh man,
he just plastered that look on. Looked a little bit too much like Toby Turner.
Hey Zoomers, we're old.
Did you know that we're old? We played Street Fighter 2.
Oh God.
Would Zoomers know who Toby Turner is?
No, absolutely
only
not.
From like seeing videos about his downfall, where it's incredibly depressing and dark now. We're like,
the rise and fall of.
Yeah, and not even just the normal like being a has-been stuff, but like he's taken bizarrely dark turns, and it's just a sad thing to look at. We're like, this guy's a bad person. Okay,
we're gonna reference two people that really aren't relevant anymore, but I went years confusing him with Total Biscuit, which are very different people.
Yeah,
I mean, Total Biscuit is in a sense not relevant anymore.
Oh no,
that's what I mean.
In a sense, you could put it that way if you wanted.
I just mean talking about content creators that are no longer really creating content for an audience.
That's one way of putting it.
Toby Turner,
but their names are so similar
for an audience still.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, the
I hope that goes on my tombstone. Just Cloud Cuckoo Country, but actually it's my real name. Not relevant anymore.
no longer creating content.
The years, instead of years of life, it's years active, like a Wikipedia page.
Oh God.
Hey,
no.
Hey, listen, after the AI takeover and we're all measured by our productivity, though, that actually will be how we date our tombstones. It's
the dystopian future where we're measured by our
yeah.
productivity as humans.
Yeah.
Once I'm dead, deep fake
it's not
my
years
voice.
alive, it's years productive. Yeah.
Deep fake my voice so you can keep making content. That way I'm always alive. There you go. That's the dystopian future.
No, but like after you retire, you have to attend your own funeral for your productivity.
Oh man, lay my YouTube channel to rest.
AI meet and greet of yourself.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Well, the best part about being a
everyone
VTuber,
attends your final episode. Nobody attends your funeral.
referring to it as attending to my final episode is so like weirdly chilling.
Welcome to my series finale.
Yeah. The weird thing about being a VTuber is that after I'm gone, someone else can just play me. Has that happened yet?
Yeah.
I think that has happened. I think
a
in
VTuber
the
died and
grand
been
scheme.
impersonated to keep the show going.
I think that the closest thing I remember of that is like Ed's World, where after Ed Gould, the animator and voice of the show, died, like for the final few episodes, another animator took over and they hired a voice actor to voice Ed, the dead guy.
That's incredible.
I think
I feel like
continued for like additional seasons.
I feel like I
don't know if
remember
it continued that long. I think there was a few more episodes,
it
but I was
became a
just
whole
like,
thing where Tom Scott picked up the show, was like self-funding the show due to the wishes of the family to keep Ed's Worlds going for another, and so he committed to doing it for another season. And then when he was planned that as being the finale and was planning on moving on with his life and going on to his own legacy and not like constantly attending to a dead friend's like thing forever, he was seen as like this person who was ruining Ed's World and abandoning Ed's World. And to this day, Ed's World is now revived again with other people, and it's still going.
oh.
It's still currently going.
That is what, because the reason I even just stopped paying attention to that was just because I just couldn't get over the uncanniness of like a person who, like this character who is based on a person who is now dead and who used to voice and animate that character is now being voiced and animated by somebody else. My brain just like didn't vibe with that.
It can be a very strange experience that this not necessarily self-insert character, because they're absurd cartoon characters, but like the one that represents the creator is very. It'd be like if there was like a Monty Ohm character in Ruby, and then they just recast him and kept the Monty Ohm character around, puppeteered after the creator had died, and it'd just be dire, as opposed to the idea of just continuing the show, which is common. A lot of shows continue after the creator dies. But them having a character makes it way weirder.
The time I feel like I've heard about this, people can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that allegedly Kizuna Ai, the VTuber, is now played and managed by a different person than who started that channel. Now, I don't know if that's actually true, which is why I said allegedly, but I think I read that recently when I was reading about the history of VTubing when I was first getting into it. So that might have happened.
I was going to say, like, who's alleging this? You?
No, I mean, I feel like I read about it on Wikipedia maybe or Twitter or something when I was seriously deep diving, like doing actual research about it, but I don't remember exactly where I read it, but it was either Kizuna Ai or some HoloLive person or something, because like the rights to their character are not the same as their rights to the performance of that character. So like they could theoretically hire someone else to do it. There's like some sort of nuance there that I'm sure I'm not describing correctly. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And like, that's fine. It's no harassment on those people. I'm not talking ill of other VTubers. It's more just, I feel like I read that somewhere, like somewhere along the line, a VTuber has in fact been replaced by a new voice actor for that character.
That's where you get to the territory of how much like, is this that person and their show, or are they playing a character that someone else can play?
Yeah.
There's a whole, like I don't play a character, so you can't like just be like, I am the Keith now. It's like, I'm not. This isn't the Colbert Report where I'm doing a bit, and this is like a personality I put on. Like, it's just the version of me that comes out in this context, and that's it.
Yeah,
but, like,
I mean, but
some
this
of these
gets
VTubers
to the...
just seem to actually be playing like a role playing character, essentially.
Yeah, I think this gets to the complexity, especially in the furry context of like, what is a fursona versus an OC versus the person, or even the fursuit, right?
Fursona versus true sona.
Yeah.
Like, is the
'Cause, like,
persona an aspirational idea of what I want to embody, or is it supposed to literally represent me, but I'm a fox?
Yeah. Like, Toaster.
I got absolutely blindsided by the popularity of VTubers, and I was like, because like I had spent ages being anxious of like, you know, being the guy who like represents himself with a series of PNGs on YouTube, and like the associated
sona.
like, you know, the rant sona,
Infamous.
the, you know, everybody gangster till the cartoon critic crosses his arms.
Until the racist
you
blue
know.
dragon crosses his arms.
Yeah, not naming names, of course, but but like I was constantly like, am I just like cringe by association? Because even though I don't have any sprites of my character crossing his arms, and I don't like get on the mic to spit like racist screeds and talk about how child labor is good actually with my rant sona. Like, even though I'm not cringe, am I cringe by association with these fucking people? And then out of nowhere, just VTubers become, or maybe it's not out of nowhere and I just wasn't paying attention, but from my perspective, out of nowhere, VTubers become like insanely popular all of a sudden, and I'm just like, oh, you know what? I'm actually just not cringe. Everyone's cringe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, VTubing for me has been like a really, I don't even necessarily want to say important, but like impactful thing for like my forward facing persona, right? Like, as I was about to say, like, Toaster is me, but Toaster is also like a bespoke character that has his own life and aspects to him. Like, he has a full name that I don't really share with people, or like things like that like in some ways represent me, but also represent a persona that I identify with. And you know, I feel like being able to step into that in the same way that I think a lot of fursuiters feel with their fursuits allows me to be a more interesting personality, right? Like on a Twitch stream or in a Let's Play, I feel much less self-conscious about that than I do myself. And that's not even necessarily saying that I have like low self-confidence. People generally see me as a relatively confident person, but being able to like disengage from that and like be the character that I am ostensibly playing in my VTube self isn't inauthentic, but it is different enough that I like get into the right mindset, right? Like, it's like a way of thinking about things. So Keith, you know, you say you're not playing a character in your videos and it's all very genuine, but there is still like an aspect of like, okay, I am performing for people now. This is a mindset that I have to think in order to be on this stage, so to speak. And I'm sure, you know, for video essays and stuff like that too, like, there's got to be some degree of like, all right, I'm putting my critic hat on and I'm like, I am viewing this through this lens and performing this lens, even if you are being your genuine, like, real self. You know what I mean? So I think that there is a line between the ingenuine playing a character that some VTubers have and the more I'm wearing a different hat today perspective that some VTubers have. And I think there's some nuance there.
I mean, like, my sort of journey of embodying my character is a little bit odd in the sense that I originally intended Cloud Cuckoo Country to be his own character that I was just the writer and actor of, and he was meant to be kind of like this feels embarrassing to say nowadays, but he was inspired loosely by the Nostalgia Critic and other, you know, angry critics from that era of the internet. And like, it was originally meant to be like, he's that, but for books. And I use him as a vector to get across opinions about books, but he's a character that I play. He's not meant to represent me. But what I found was that it doesn't matter how many times I told people this is a character. You know, the character's name is Cloud Cuckoo Country and my name is Nick. And so you refer to me as this and the thing that... No, people just referred to me as Cloud Cuckoo Country as though that was as though I'd intended for that to be my name. They treated my behavior while in character as genuine. So eventually, even though I started out as Cloud Cuckoo Country being a character that I played, Cloud Cuckoo Country over time just became closer to me and my actual self, because that's just how other people were going to interpret him no matter what. So I felt I made him more genuine, a genuine representation of me. And it turns out being a genuine representation of me means that he's not negative about most things anymore. Like I used to do negative reviews where I just rant about books because I thought that was fun to make, but that's not how I actually am in real life. I just find being incredibly negative and incredibly over the top fun. But people would treat that as my actual opinions, and I'm like, well, if I'm going to be genuine, I actually have to be more positive, because that's how I actually am. I don't deliberately seek things out specifically to not enjoy them. Instead, I, typically seek things out because I enjoy them, and I talk to people about things because I enjoy them. So, if people complain of like, oh, you used to make all of these negative reviews, what happened? And I'm like, well, you people wanted me to be genuine. Turns out I'm genuinely positive.
Yeah. I'm running into that issue sort of right now, where it's like, so the game that my cat just sneezed all over me. Great. That was just really unpleasant. I'm currently playing Sherlock Holmes Chapter 1 for my Twitch streams. And it's doing really inexplicably well. And I have a lot of criticisms about this game. I generally don't like to play games that I am not having a good time with. I have a kind of hard rule where I finish everything I start for academic criticism reasons. But this Sherlock Holmes game has been a very trying experience for me to play. I struggle to stream it for more than a few hours at a time because it's so exhausting to me. But like, people are eating it up, and I definitely have been very critical of it as I play. I don't think it's like a horrible game. I don't think it's like abysmally bad or anything. It's just like, it does a lot of things that really bug me, and I have been very vocal about them because I'm playing it live, and like, sometimes I'll just like mutter frustrations and it picks up in chat, and then it becomes the thing that people are talking about. And I'm trying really hard to avoid that negativity becoming like a keystone part of my persona, because like, I don't want people, like, I don't want my engagement to be purely fueled by me playing things that I hate, because that would make running a Twitch channel exhausting. And then on top of that, like, I don't want to be mad all the time. Like, I would like to be able to sit back and just be like in wonder about a thing that I'm really enjoying, and like talk about the things that I really love, because I often, here's like a philosophical bomb for the podcast. Like, I generally feel like a lot of, especially media and video games, can be learned to be appreciated. I don't mean this in the sense of like, oh, bad games are actually good, or like this like terrible, horrible, like, thing that was made with like really negative intentions, or, something that's like horribly racist or something. Like, you can tolerate that and learn to like it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying more like, sometimes video games, especially film, especially on your first experience with it, can leave you feeling really alienated. But then you can go back to it and like really mine it for something that's meaningful to you. I use Pathologic as a really great example. Pathologic is a game that's very prickly and is a lot of suffering. But if you give it the time and you learn to acquire that taste, you can understand and gain meaning in that suffering and learn kind of what this game might be trying to say and get something out of that. So I really, really like to learn to appreciate things and speak about them really positively, because I hope that by speaking about them positively and talking about the things that I learned to appreciate, I can teach other people how to learn to appreciate a thing that maybe they rubbed up against and didn't enjoy originally. And that's sort of the goal with presenting a lot of these games that I like. So it makes playing games that I like might have really legitimate negative criticisms about exhausting, because while I do like to point out like, oh, I don't like how this puzzle requires me to go through a certain amount of steps, even though the whole game is about deductive reasoning. If you can deduce the answer, why can't I just like select the answer? Why do I have to wait for the game to tell me I picked up the scissors and the tape in the right order to like reach this clue from a gameplay perspective? That's really irritating to me. But I don't want to focus on that, because I don't want people to just view the channel and the Let's Play from this perspective of like, oh, he's picking things apart again. That makes this truly bad. Haha, more bad things. This is fun. Because being in that space is just so toxic and like bad for your mentality, and it creates burnout in a way that like I just really want to avoid.
I do agree, but I have a very, very different attitude when it comes to like spending my time consuming media, though, because I'm just of the opinion that there is so much media available these days that if I'm not enjoying something, I don't feel like I need to put in the effort to enjoy it when I can just go and do something else. Like, I drop books all the time, just fully in the knowledge that maybe if I kept reading it, it would get better. But like, if I'm not reading it specifically for a video, or if I'm not, you know, if I'm just reading it of my own time or leisure, or if I'm like, you know, I don't, or if I'm reading it and I don't think that I'm going to end up talking about it that much, and I can't really see a point, and I'm not enjoying it, I'll just be like, nah, I don't feel like I need to finish this, because
sure.
I have so many other things that I want to read, watch, play, etc., that I feel like I can just move on. And, you know, somebody could come along and tell me, oh, if you were just stuck with it for a few more chapters, it would have gotten really, really good, and I think you would have really, really enjoyed it. And I'm like, yeah, you know, that's probably true, but I don't care.
I think that's definitely fair. And like, I'm not advocating for every single person out there to like knuckle through everything they're not enjoying.
Yeah.
I totally don't think that's healthy necessarily.
And I'm not advocating to just drop everything as soon as you stop enjoying it. I'm just kind of like, you know, have a certain tolerance, but don't like make huge concessions for your levels of tolerance. Oh,
for sure. I more or less, I think I take the stance that I take with my own personal readings of things. And just, I mean, books are a great example, but games are too, is like, I've come to realize that I enjoy the process of understanding a work and like seeing it as it is, and like kind of not devoid, but separated from like my personal feelings for it. Like, I enjoy this process. For me, reading is not just escapism, or is not just like chasing things that I like. A lot of it is, okay, I have decided to invest in this piece of media to see what it's trying to do, and like whether or not I bounce off of it is like something that's personal to me, but I enjoy the process of like going through and seeing what at least it is trying to say before I not even make a judgment call. Like, that's not the right way to phrase it, but like before I personally decide where I land on it. And obviously, that is not something that everyone should do for everything. There's plenty of media that I have just avoided, and that people are like, oh, it gets so good. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'm not interested. Like, I think there's a difference between like struggling through something you're not interested in, and instead like struggling through something you're interested in but isn't gelling with you necessarily. Like, that figuring out where that interest is, I think, is like the real deciding factor on whether or not I'm trying to stick with something. But it has also led me. It's like led me out of my comfort zone in a way that has like enriched a lot of my media experience in a way that I probably wouldn't have been able to enrich it in the past. And I found some of my favorite things this way that I originally bristled up against and did not like, and then like reread them multiple times and then was like, holy crap, this is my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah. Me, like my thing with books, and why I have this attitude with books, I think specifically, is that I am so sensitive to like prose quality. If the prose of a book is good, I will probably enjoy it, even if the characters and setting and plot are absolute nonsense. But if the prose of a novel is bad or boring, I will struggle through it even if I like the story and the characters. So like I think that I have a pretty good gauge for how good a book's prose is. Although I do still acknowledge that I have my own tastes when it comes to prose. It's not like I don't like a book and I'm like, aha, I have definitive proof that the writing is bad. But generally speaking, prose quality remains relatively consistent throughout most of an individual novel. Like, it's very, very rare that I think in fact, I don't think I've ever come across a book where it starts out with the prose quality of like of like a below average YA fiction and then suddenly spikes up into classic literary poetry halfway through.
It's hard to read a book where one chapter is just suddenly written at a lower, like, you know, comprehensive prose reading or writing level.
Yeah, unless it's like it's a very intentional change in the prose style. And my favorite example of that is always like Robbie Arnott, where he deliberately in his book Flames, he deliberately like switched out the writing style and the perspective and even the like the pace and the structure of the way he told the story. Every single chapter of that book. And even the tense, some chapters are written in present tense, some in past. Some in third person, some in first, and so on. And like, but it's very, very obvious that that's what he's doing. So when I get to a chapter that's like, you know, written in this way, way simplified style, I'm like, very clearly this is a choice and I'm supposed to try and interpret it, right?
Or even House of Leaves.
You know,
where every perspective has a different style, and the whole chapter is basically a technical document about an analysis strategy.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend Johnny Truant's segments in that book because nobody enjoys those, and the people who enjoy those kind of enjoy them ironically. They're like, "Oh, it's so great." It's like the H Bomber guy thing of, "It's so great how badly this is written on purpose," or something. You know, let me tell you why this thing that's bad is good actually, because being bad is good on purpose, which is legit, but also in the context of like House of Leaves, I got what it was trying to do pretty early on, and then the rest of it is just like, oh, yeah, back to the bad bit again. Let me just tread water on this bit, but while waiting for it to get back to the scary house. And then, like, later on, the bit that's absolutely taking the piss is that, I'm not going to spoil much, but there's like one line of Johnny Truant where he's writing out, you know, you're probably skipping all of my sections, aren't you?
Yep. I knew you were going to bring up this section. That's the thing that I think about all the time, where the footnotes begin to diverge from what they're even saying. And he's just like, I'm just writing to write, like, at this point. Like, I know you're not reading. Fascinating.
I'm like, that's just absolutely taking the piss.
Little did he know, I read all of his chapters. The chapter I skipped was the one about echoes.
Oh man, that's such a good chapter, though.
I literally could not, like it goes back to like
that wasn't even written, but that wasn't even
potential
written by Johnny, wasn't
ADHD
that?
diagnosis in the future, symptom number 75 or whatever. But like, I literally could not read the Echoes chapter. It was like trying to read like the textbooks that I wouldn't read, that I never read in college, that I was assigned to read.
That wasn't Johnny Truant though. That wasn't that Zampano.
Yeah, that was Zampano.
That was Zampano.
I read every Johnny
that was one of his
chapter.
sections, yeah.
For me, the issue with Johnny Truant, I'm like, wow, pretty rapey. Could you stop?
Yeah, I know, but also
I'm pretty sure
he's just a fucking liar, though.
Embellisher.
Literally,
he's an
first
edgelord trying to shock you, and I'm like, all right.
Yeah. Literally, the first story he tells the reader is of him making shit up to impress someone else. And as soon as I read that, I was like, all right, he's an unreliable narrator. I get it.
One of my favorite video essays about House of Leaves is Nightmind's alleged analysis of House of Leaves. And I won't spoil the pretense of that series, but as much as I think there are flaws with it, I think that the trick it plays, and I won't get into what that trick is extraordinarily clever and very funny, especially in the context of that book.
It's funny. It was funny to me that
I dropped Nightmind's videos, no joke, because the biggest pet peeve of mine, the single biggest, is video essayists who just summarize the thing they're talking about. And Nightmine's videos were that for a long time, and I don't think I got to the bit where like there's this trick or whatever that you're mentioning, because the only thing I remember from trying to watch Nightmine's videos was I could just go read House of Leaves.
Yes, his House of Leaves videos are playing a trick, and it is a very mean-spirited trick. So I do not advise sitting through it if you find them tiring, because you get the point that he is making if you find it tiring. That is what I will say about those videos. But Nightmind definitely, I think he has issues with some of his content, and like a lot of it is exactly what you're saying, or it's just summary content. But without getting too deeply into it, I actually do like a lot of Nightmind's content as a previous ARG player. People don't know this about me, but when I was a teenager, I was actually involved in a lot of ARGs, alternate reality games, and there was never a very good historical archival system for ARGs. So I do appreciate that he goes through and archives and summarizes them, but that's more for an academic purpose, I think, because no one else is archiving them.
I will say, as somebody who doesn't enjoy ARGs, I do enjoy Nightmine's videos about ARGs, but I know that I am the kind of person where if I actually did play ARGs, I probably wouldn't enjoy Nightmine.
Yes.
Because I would just go and play the ARGs myself. And it's the same thing where, like, you know, because I had read House of Leaves, I enjoyed Nightmine's video on it far less than if I had no interest in House of Leaves and just used Nightmine's videos as a proxy for it.
For me, the Nightmine video was just an uh-oh moment, because, as you might remember, it heavily fixates on the Echoes chapter for the entirety of itself, which was a real uh-oh moment for me, where I'm like, I may have not gotten this book because I could not literally read that chapter. It was impossible. Like, I could not do it. Like, I got through the rest of the book fine. I could not read that chapter. Like, I enjoyed, like, as a video essayist, I was getting a real kick out of the fact that it's like two separate layers of fiction and then a third layer of what is essentially just a video essay script, like, about the other chapter, the other chunk of the story. Like, the Zampano bits are just the kind of stuff I liked. Like, I didn't make any video essays yet at the time, I think, but obviously I've been consuming them consistently since like 2012 or some shit. I tried to make a Resident Evil one back in like 2013 and gave up. So like that was Zampano was very entertaining to read, except for the part where you have like a fucking like English lit textbook chapter that I just was so technical in nature that I just could not hold any of it in my head long enough to, like, I was constantly starting pages over and just being like, I'm not absorbing any of this. I literally get halfway through a sentence and I just want to think about something else.
You might seriously enjoy S, because S is kind of similar to House of Leaves in that it's like several different layered. Yeah, the Ship of Theseus one, where there's like several different layered stories, except it's like way more fun. And it's less, and like nothing in the book is written specifically to annoy you. Like very clearly, Johnny's sections are written to test people's patience, and some of the Zampano bits I think are also written to try and test people's patience. And you know, there is some stuff in S that I have criticisms of, obviously, because it's not a perfect novel. But at the very least, everything in the book is written with the purpose to entertain you. So it's not like you're going to have to feel like you're going to force yourself to slog through a bit that was written to be bad on purpose.
So S is very outwardly fun.
Funnily enough, I own a copy of S for the same reason I own a copy of House of Leaves, which is that when I had a P.O. box with Andrew back at the old place, someone sent both of them to me at the same time. They sent me them together, and so it took me like 4 years to read House of Leaves finally, and I still have S with an unbroken seal just sitting on my shelf. Like, one day, I have so many. I was
so excited when I saw it on your shelf. I like what part of a message to you was like, "Oh my god, you've read S," and you were like, "No, I haven't. I'm a fraud."
I was a big fan. One last
I
note.
thought you must have, because I saw it on like 2 different shelves in the background of your video, and I was like, clearly he's moved it to be on camera, so he wants people to know he's read it.
I think I just like had a different scheme at one point where I just had to reorganize things to fit something. Like once upon a time, I had a Junji Ito square, and it still is, but the Junji Ito has become so expansive it cannot be contained in one square anymore, and I have to like figure out how to like layer them to fit, like I've had book capacity.
Literally earlier we were talking about like authorial intent and how certain things are just mistakes, and it's like there's me assuming that you deliberately put S in the background of 2 different videos.
Yeah, things are only intentional in my background if the cover's visible.
Right, yeah.
Like I even put Pantone, the board game, on my shelf in the last video as an inside joke. Just to fuck with people that know.
I'm gonna have to fucking play Ad Astra just so that I can watch that fucking video.
One of the last things I wanted to say about the Night Mind video before we move on is just I think a good way of describing this actually gets back to a point we were making earlier, which is that I think the thesis of that video and why I think it's really interesting in relation to House of Leaves is the thesis is basically don't take people's word for what things mean, even if they appear to have credibility and a platform that is credible, if you don't also look at what they're saying from a critical lens. I think it's clever. I think it's clever to make that statement in relation to House of Leaves. Because I think that's one of the big things that House of Leaves is also saying is like, what is the veracity of information when all you have is a unverifiable source? And that's pretty cool. And it's funny that we bring this up in relation to, video essays and discourse on the internet and things like that. Because it's like, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all just like people who are just like shouting into the void, right? Like, even with credibility, you can still be fallible. And it's a very hard line to walk, like trying to track how consistent or how true interpretations of these different pieces of media or even interpretations of like authorial intent can be when the people who are consuming the media are consuming the discussion of it by proxy or as proxy for the media itself. Which is a uniquely internet thing, I think, to discuss nowadays, because as we were saying earlier, tons of people participate in discourse.
You might need to reconnect
without actually. Oh, is my voice going weird?
Or I don't know, Cuckoo, were you hearing that, or was it just me?
No, I was hearing him go weird as well. Hello again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is this better? Am I good?
It was getting increasingly hard because of like
where'd I drop off?
Distortion. I followed most of it, but it was just it was edging towards like where I'm gonna get in trouble here if you just let him keep going. I'm not gonna be able to follow this soon.
Gotcha.
It was degrading.
All right, now you're sounding weird to me too.
Alrighty. Clicky clicky.
Is my connection hello?
You're beautiful and clear, Cuckoo. But yeah, I guess what I was saying is just
given the
great.
internet situation.
Yeah, thanks, Tony Abbott. Not to get too deep into Australian politics, but every time there's an internet trouble in this country, I say thanks, Tony Abbott, because he gutted the NBN rollout. Yeah, that was ages.
But
that
yeah,
was like
I mean,
10
I think
years
it's interesting,
ago.
right?
But
because we're in an age of discourse and people talk about whatever, and it's hard to figure out where people are and what things stand for when 95% of people are just engaging with something by proxy of other things, right? Like people don't actually read or watch or play the things they want to discuss the most. They just kind of parrot other people's opinions about them. So it's just funny.
Oh yeah, it's an ongoing joke it's becoming an ongoing joke during our streams to be like, oh yeah, I also watched that video.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a genuine fear I had in that talking about Beastars, tons of people talked about Beastars already. Talking about the Monster Hunter movie, tons of videos about the Monster Hunter movie. Being the person who not only has the highest profile analysis of Ad Astra, an indie project, but also introduces a lot of people to it while giving my interpretation of it, that can quickly threaten to become the canonical understanding of what the entire thing is and means, even though it's just, I'm just a dude who looked at a thing and thought about these things, and that's all it is. Like, every now and then I'll search my name in the Echo Discord just to see the ways that stuff around me is coming up, because it's common enough, and you get a lot of hits about a certain fox and Echo that's named Keith. But aside from that, there's a bunch of stuff about people discussing the Lego Shoe video or the Ad Astra video or whatever happened in a Let's Play recently or whatever. And in particular, I noticed people have really latched onto the reverse dating sim point from Ad Astra. It has been repeated in that Discord at least a dozen times. And it's like both flattering and worrying at the same time, because it feels like people, like, my opinion about the thing becomes the canonical, that's just what the story is, man, and that's what he was always going for, even though he never said whether I was on the right track about any of that stuff or not. And it's just, it's very strange that when you are when you become this widespread opinion about a thing, like you're the loudest voice essentially about it, that becomes, you become the authority on it, which is often not what any of us are even trying to do when we make videos about things. We just want to nerdily info.
I absolutely was trying to become an authority on agodic literature.
Usually we're just trying to nerdily
nobody was talking about
like
it, and me. So I went and actually like interviewed Espenjay Orset. I'm not going to publish it because it turns out it wasn't like that relevant to the video that I made. But like I asked him about like, has he kept up with like the topic, and he's like, no, since 1997 after I published it, I've not actually thought that much about agodic literature at all, and he's now basically mostly just a video game scholar. But like, you know, old school one, so he hasn't like kept up with like loot box discourse or whatever. He's very much still interested in like systems of hypertext and how you can sort of construct things. And so I kind of, in reading his book and then in actually going and reading a whole bunch of agodic literature and doing that for like a video, I started to realize, oh God, have I actually become like the only expert on this fucking niche ass topic that even the guy who first proposed it hasn't paid attention to it in over 20 years. But like,
hey man,
but like,
maybe you have.
Saying to people, but I ended up saying to people that I inadvertently became a expert on agodic literature out of spite to House of Leaves fans, which is funny because I like House of Leaves, but I just hate how people talk about it, because like I felt like the only person on earth when I was like looking up what people were saying about it, because the story of it was that a friend recommended the book to me, and I had recognized the recommendation because other people are like, you might be interested in House of Leaves, it's a really, really weird book. And eventually a friend recommended it to me, and then I was like, all right, fine, I guess I'll finally go and fucking read this book. And then I read it, and I was like, this is so bizarre and unique. Why are there no other books like this? And then I thought, maybe I should look for other books like this, and then looked around, and the first things that turned up were just people saying, oh my God, House of Leaves is so unique. No other book is like this. It's the most unique thing ever made. And then I look a little bit further, and it turns out there are heaps of books like this, and there's an entire genre that some people call agodic literature. And then I look up what agodic literature is, and I find Espenjay Orset's stuff. And so I get really, really irritated at how like House of Leaves is like the only example of this thing that people know, and end up and so I tell people I inadvertently became a expert on the genre out of spite to House of Leaves fans. And then And then, like 2 weeks before my video goes live, fucking Super Eye Patch Wolf publishes a video in which he starts talking. In which part is like the liminal spaces video, where the last section of it is just him talking about how cool and unique and spooky House of Leaves is, and I'm just like, good fucking god! I wish I had gotten my video out before Super Eye Patch Wolf had published his. I don't know if he's. I'm pretty sure he hasn't seen my video, but like, you know, it was exactly the type of thing that I was trying to respond to. And what's even funnier is that like a week after Super Eye Patch Wolf published that, fucking another booktuber I follow, Man Carrying Thing, who also doesn't know I exist, published a video called "Why is the internet so obsessed with House of Leaves?"
Yeah.
And he's just talking about how he doesn't like the book and how people overrate it. And then my video comes out where I'm just like, House of Leaves is cool, but have you heard of all of these other books?
Yeah.
Just this bizarre spike
it's
of
funny.
House of
I
Leaves
think, like, damn, I
discourse
timed it.
years after it's released.
House of Leaves is House of Leaves is just evergreen. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, either I timed this extremely well or I timed it extremely poorly, and I don't know which one yet.
In marketing, we call it drafting.
Still not sure.
For me, the question is whether anyone on the planet has actually read The Familiar.
Have I read
The Familiar?
No, I have not.
The Familiar is the series that Mark Z. Danielewski has written since 2015. That is 5 books that are all as long as House of Leaves. And I posted screenshots in the chat just now of like, it's more House of Leaves nonsense. And like, he's trying to capitalize on that exact thing, I'm sure. And I've never heard anyone mention them. I only know about them because I checked, like, I looked up the author once and saw these listings.
I have read of Danielewski's work.
I have heard people mention his other works, but they say that like House of Leaves is his most comprehensible novel, which is funny.
I've read only Revolutions, the Walesto Letters, and the 50-Year Sword. Those are the 3 Danielewski things I've read, other than House of Leaves, that is. And I honestly don't remember basically any of them. Only Revolutions was weird. It was like if that's the one I think it is, it's the one that like you flip over and then you read another story and they like meet in the middle, one upside down, one right side up from the original.
That's fun.
Perspective. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Choose your own way to navigate that, I guess.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly all of it. I just remembered that I read it like right after reading House of Leaves and I wasn't like super into it. But yeah, 50-Year Sword's kind of interesting. That one's kind of, I don't know, intriguing is like the best way to put it, but
I enjoy a book just having a little trick to it, even if it's really minor. Like bring up back like Looking for Alaska. If you read it as a print copy, it has a very specific quirk, which is just the fact that it has a black page, which is visible at all times when you're reading it. And so at some point, like this is just a textual, this is a like the metatextual element of just trying to read this thing is that while you're engaging with this book, at some point inevitably you are going to just clue into this black page and turn to it, and you're gonna wonder what the fuck it is, and all it says is after, and you're like, what the fuck does that, and then and that's it's a bit of a suspense builder. That's just an interesting way to play with the format specifically that you can't translate to other formats directly because you don't see a game in front of you the way you see a book in front of you. Every chapter, instead of being called chapter whatever, is called 127 days before, and is just counting down to the black page. And it's like, that is not the core of, I mean, actually it is the core of the book to a large, I mean, it is about the before and after of what that page represents. But like, it's just a really minor trick you can add to add a really strange sense of like pacing and suspense to the entire thing, where things that otherwise don't, like unrelated scenes that are not about building tension, are still a part of this ongoing like road that are taking you towards just this looming question of what's going to happen when you hit the black page. And it's like, that's just kind of like a strange little unique experience you can have with that book. And it's just kind of fun when books do anything like that, instead of just be like, a book is a series of linear script and that's all that it is, and you just, this is merely a vessel for my script that does not take formatting into account of any kind. And like, But like obviously House of
Yeah.
Leaves is like, what if all formatting?
Yeah. No, there was like a particular book where I can't even remember what the book was. I just remember that like the opening chapter featured some like sassy YA protagonist performing like, you know, Assassin's Creed style climbing a building to sneak in a fantasy setting. And it was describing the actions in a way where I was reading it with my friends and I just turned to my friend and said, like, this reads like a movie script that didn't get approved. And it's like, oh, I'm putting this into a book as a concession for the fact that I will never make a movie or something like that.
And this stuff varies,
like,
and how much people tolerate it or are encouraged by it varies and whatnot. Like, I don't know if you've heard of Will Grayson. Will Grayson.
I will. Oh, I attempted reading that. I didn't like it. Yeah, no, my relationship with John. Yeah, my relationship with John Green is a bit odd because like I really, really loved Looking for Alaska. I really, really hated Paper Towns, and then I was kind of both ways on The Fault in Our Stars. And then I think I was probably just worn out when I tried reading Will Grayson, so I didn't finish it, and I also didn't particularly like David Levithan's sections either. And then I think the reason why I even made the video on on Turtles All the Way Down is because I was just like, I'm so frustrated by John Green, but in a way that's like very particular to me, that I have to make a video about it. Because otherwise I was like very, very other than that, I was very, very willing to just sort of leave John Green to John Green fans and just go, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
You can have John Green. I will let you be. Because I don't think he's a bad writer. I think he's a fine writer, but his writing is like not my thing in a way that's like very particular to me.
There's an element of like, this is all very funny because this is a because I'm a hack. There's a cut chapter in the Ad Astra video where I specifically contrast Howley's writing style with John Green's writing style. And this is an ongoing thing where I never want to write. I never want to make a video about a book. And it's because I think I'm a terrible, even though I technically did make a video about a book, kind of, I think I'm a terrible reviewer of books because I feel like I process books the way that people I don't like the opinions of process movies, where not like weird, not like weird reactionary takes, but like people who have incredibly boring takes about movies. Like, they're just like, they just have these really like Ruby sort of like layman reactions of like, just, yeah, this is pretty fun. Or it's like, oh, this is boring. Too much CG. Or like, that's all I really have to say about anything. And it's just like non-reactions and there's no discussion to be had about like what happened in the movie or what the authorial intent is. Like, I have had multiple car rides
you're like
where
worried
Stephanie,
that you're going to become the Jeremy Jahns of books.
well, it's just like people are like, oh yeah, I like the music and the colors and the costumes, versus like me and Stephanie have had multiple car rides where we break back into discussing Joker again because we're like, what the fuck was the intent? Like, is that supposed to be the author insert? Like, is that a point we're supposed to agree with, but it's made by the guy that does this 2 seconds later? So like, what the fuck is, like, you can actually get into discussion about a movie. For me, the entirety of books is that like it's such an attention thing to get through them that like it's entirely based on the writing style of the author. So like I got through Artemis and the Martian because I loved the way that writer wrote those books, and I get through John Green and Hank Green books so easily because I am absolutely vibing with the entirety of how they phrase everything. And it's like, it's very funny because John Green books in particular refuse to have a plot, like almost ever. They are usually at most making one very specific point, like Paper Towns is, but it's entirely just dwelling in this very specific writing style that is echoed in the way that they also do their vlogs and other scripted content all the time that they've been doing forever. And so like the way I knew that I was hooked forever was the fact that John Green made The Anthropocene Reviewed, where every chapter is just kind of him waxing philosophical and nostalgically about a thing. And he just brings out a beauty in things and a perspective in things and phrases it in a way that is so entertaining to read through for me that, yes, there's a chapter about hot dogs. Like, it's a chapter about a specific hot dog stand. And that's the entire chapter. And the Anthropocene Reviewed is not, there's no through line except for the general theme of what the point of the thing is. But like, it's not, this is not a narrative. It does not build, the hot dogs do not come up later, and they are not foreshadowed, because that's not how that, it's like the whole thing is essentially an anthology of chapters about things. And I fucking ate that book up. It was fantastic. I had a great time because of just purely from the way it's written.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of a similar way. Like, on one hand, I really like super heady, like deep, nuanced novels that are like hard to fully understand and appreciate, but you need really specific context to like them and stuff like that. Like, I like the literary stuff out there, but I also really just like pulpy fiction. So like, I'm sure I could get into serious lit crit if I tried, but at the same time, I'm like, is it really worth it for me to do that? Because, like, on one hand, my favorite series of novels ever is Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, which are known for being, like, difficult to understand. The first time I read them, I had no fucking clue what was happening, and it, like, went back to go through them and really enjoyed them and mined meaning out of them. But then on the other hand, like, I really like Stephen King stuff just because it's like enjoyable and readable, and I like the connected universe and all those things. And I've read more Star Wars expanded universe fiction than like most people would consider
you can do like, the fucking 17-hour video that's like a holistic review of the Star Wars canon. I
would rather die than talk about Star Wars on my YouTube
discourse
channel.
Singularity.
But you know what I mean? Like, on one hand, like, I do really like the lit crit litty stuff that, you know, you could talk about, but at the same time, like, I also just like, you know, the Dark Tower. Like, that's all there is to say about it. I don't have incredibly insightful things to say about literature, I don't think.
I am not like exclusively a hard lit guy, like, and I also refuse to be called a literary critic. I am a book reviewer.
Yeah.
Anyone who seriously self-identifies as a literary critic is like some pretentious asshole. But it was like, yeah, I'm so smart and cultured and whatever. But like, you know, my favorite fantasy novel is Dragon Charm, which is literally like the most generic fantasy you've ever read, except all the characters are dragons, and I bet you can guess why I appreciate that book.
Graham Edwards. I see.
Graham, yeah, don't read the sequels. I am always like insisting that you don't need to like approach books as like this highly intellectual activity or whatever, that you can just, you know, approach them for fun and entertainment, and that's like a big part of the thing. I want more. It always like breaks my heart whenever I hear somebody say something like, "Oh, I don't think I'd be good enough to be a book reviewer or a book critic." I'm like, I'm not good enough to be a book critic, but I still do it anyway. People disagree with my opinions all the time. But like, you know, it's not like some highly intellectual activity where you like need to memorize the entire of like literary canon and the fucking literary history, because I haven't learned all of that shit. I'm still learning about that. It's just that,
at a certain point, it's impossible, right? Like, there's so many books.
There's too much. There's like a Matthew Matosis video where he laments that, like, you know, we're reaching a point in video game history where, you know, it's not possible for a new video game critic to have played all the classics. But, you know, he doesn't. And, you know, it used to be that a video game critic, even if they hadn't, it could have at least been possible for one really, really, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Ambitious. No, yes, for some really, really ambitious video game critic to play every single classic, but we've probably moved beyond that point by now, and it's not possible for a
the historiography of video gaming is now becoming more fragmented because there's much
and you get
less
people who like
opportunity.
specialize in specific genres rather than be like a expert of video games as a whole. But you kind of already see that with like literature. Like when I was in uni, I read a lot of like academic literary stuff, which, let me tell you, there's no faster way to convince yourself that you don't want to be an academic literary critic than reading the shit that they write. But they specialize in like time periods and genres. Like you can, if you want to, be a literary academic who specializes in like romance from 1800 to 1850. Like you can be that specific of an expert if you want, or you can go broad or whatever. But it's like, the medium of books is big enough and has been around for long enough that you're never going to be like an expert on just books. You're going to be an expert on a specific segment of books, right?
Because there's infinite. There's just infinite in every field. Infinite books, infinite indie games. Like it's just a deluge.
Yeah, you're not gonna consume everything.
Now we have self-publishing.
Oh well,
my food just got here, so I'm gonna need to bail.
Overdue to probably quit for this.
Listen, we've given you plenty of content.
Maybe
the
maybe
more
next
content,
time we'll
the
talk
better.
about furry conventions or something.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for hanging out. This has been a good time.
Thanks for watching, everybody. You can check out. I closed the tabs. I'm so good at my job.
You can check out this fucking guy at whatever YouTube channel he runs.
Yeah, you can check out Cloud Cuckoo Country at Cloud Cuckoo. I'll just put the links in the description. That's always the smart thing to do. And what Toaster, your Twitch is Toasted Ringtail?
Toasted Ringtail. Yeah, that's me.
Watch more Let's Plays than you have time for, and listen about books and participate in book club. Do it.
Do it.
All right.
All right. See you all next time.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.